Chapter 1648. She could not help but think of LV Zheng's previous words. It's easy to live, but it's hard to live with dignity. Kang Xintong did not dare to imagine that she would end up in such a situation many years later. After vomiting, she squatted down and wailed while hugging her knees, extremely resentful of her gender. Kang Xintong choked and said, "Sir, all women in the world are like this. They are born to suffer. Why do women still exist? It's better to die since birth." So what if her mother did it for her own good? Did her mother disregard her wishes and thoughts and force her to suffer so much for her own good? What she thought was good, could it be that it was really good? Why didn't she ask herself which was better? A dignified and painless death, or a dignified but oppressive and violent life? Violence and torture in the name of love, were they not abuse? LV Zheng interrupted her random thoughts at the right time. You have such messy thoughts because you have too little knowledge. It's just like how you only saw your mother's evil earlier. You don't know that all living beings suffer. Whether it's these women in the dark alley or other refugees who never have enough to eat, the most painful thing for them is not the torture inflicted on them, such as hunger and poverty. It's the endless torture that they can only be freed from until death. A person can't see the slightest bit of hope in life, and can only live like a walking corpse. They don't even know why they're living, only knowing that they can live as long as they can. This kind of suffering without dignity is often more unbearable than physical torture. The common people could often endure physical torture, but they could not endure mental torture. The result of not being able to endure it was the idea of using death to escape, like Kang Xintong. This was just going from a dead end to a dead end. What's the use of knowing more? Kang Xintong was, after all, a young girl who had just turned 12. Although her life was bumpy, she did not face the cruelest purgatory on earth. The world was still black and white. LV Zheng wanted to teach her what it meant to be gray. It's not that all women in the world are like this. It's just that the world is not stable. Anyone can fall into such a situation. LV Zheng said, using beauty to serve people is a shortcut, but not every shortcut can reach the same level. It was the same as using beauty to serve others, but there was also a difference in the target of serving others. If your target was your stepfather, the prostitutes in the dark alleys would most likely be the portrayal of the rest of your life. If your target was a noble with a high status and authority, or a hegemon who sat on the throne of the world, it would be a different situation. Isn't that because I'm inexperienced? Kang Xintong was speechless. After a while, she hung her head in embarrassment. I don't think I have that ability either. Kang Xintong knew that she had a good foundation and had inherited the best side of her biological parents. This could be seen from her stepfather's increasingly passionate and eccentric gaze these 2 years. Even though she was inexperienced, she knew what he was thinking. It was an undisguised, predatory look of a wild beast. Every time, her mother would panic and abuse her even more vigorously, which gave her an illusion. If that man was obedient to her, her mother would not dare to abuse her again. The repeated hints made her come up with this equation in her mind. Using her own body in exchange for power in the hands of a man, and using this to suppress her mother who bullied her, she could live a better life. Just as LV Zheng said, she was inexperienced, and her vision limited her imagination. The best choice she could think of was this, and the only target was her stepfather. Under such circumstances, how could she think that her beauty could attract someone who was more powerful than her stepfather? LV Zheng sighed and shook his head. Do you know who Lu Shi is? Kang Xintong shook her head. Even though Jiang Pingji was a famous and powerful feudal lord, not many people at the bottom of the hierarchy knew her. Dongqing was still alright. Jiang Pingji was quite well known. Many people knew the name of this feudal lord, where he was from, and whether he was a man or a woman. The people in Nanxing were more ignorant. It was good enough for them to know that there were other countries besides Nanxing, let alone feudal lords from other countries. They could not even maintain their lives, so how would they have the time to understand these things? Even if they wanted to, they had no corresponding channels. Lu Shi is a woman. Kang Xintong blinked in confusion and guessed, a stunning beauty. LV Zheng recalled the face of his childhood friend, and shook his head to deny it. She was quite liked by the young ladies in Langyi County, But he had never heard of any man liking her. She had a nasty mouth and could not wait to gnash her teeth. On the contrary, Zixiao, who was known as the flower of Langyi County, was much more popular with men than that authentic woman. She is not a stunning beauty. It is true that she looks decent, but very few people pay attention to her face. Actually, no matter how ugly or beautiful she is, whether she is healthy or disabled, it is meaningless to her and the people around her. Kang Xintong asked, "Why is that?" "Because there are not many people in the world who are qualified to look directly at her face. When people bow down to her, they first see her feet and not her face." Kang Xintong asked again, "Is she the empress?" "Empress?" Zheng curled his lips mockingly. No matter how noble the empress is, she still has to rely on her husband and her family. Once the country is destroyed, her husband no longer dotes on her, and her family abandons her. The empress, who is second only to one and above tens of thousands of people, will also fall into a dark alley. How can she be compared to her? Kang Xintong could not understand who the Lushi that the teacher was talking about was. Lushi was a woman, but she had a more noble status than the empress. Could she be the empress? She asked timidly. The one who is more noble than the empress is either the empress or the deities in heaven. Zheng said. She is not the empress. After all, she did not announce to the world that she was going to ascend to the throne, but she is not far from being an empress in name only. A dynasty could be established in the land of Dongqing. Jiangpingji, who occupied a territory larger than Dongqing, was naturally qualified to be the empress. However, her ambition was obviously not something that Dongqing could accommodate. Nanqing was also the target that the tip of her sword pointed at. Kang Xintong's small mouth opened wide as she listened. Her small face was full of shock. The higher you go, the further you can see. Even if you can't reach her level, looking at her you can remember one thing. A woman's appearance is neither a blessing nor a curse. It is just a part of her that is given by her parents and is born with. Even though she is a woman, she is not born to crawl on the ground. Zheng smiled and flicked her forehead. He said, "As long as you stand at a higher position than others, your appearance will only be the capital that they praise you. On the other hand, you will be the prey that they covet. Just like your mother, she is just a prey." Kang Xintong's lips turned pale as she listened. Your mother is indeed at fault, but she sincerely hoped that you could live with dignity. It was rare for Zheng to have the patience to say so much. Even he himself was surprised. If Wei Ci was also a salted fish in the streaming room, he could only express his feelings by clicking 666. Chapter 1649. Prejudice and hatred were accumulated over a long period of time. Even if Zheng talked until his mouth was dry, Kang Xintong would not immediately understand her mother's painstaking efforts. However, she was willing to think from her mother's point of view with a fair attitude. This was already a great improvement. She could think about her mother's matters in the future. At the moment, Kang Xintong was more concerned about the matters in front of her, such as, "Teacher, do you also want me to be your concubine?" Children were different from adults. When adults mentioned these matters, most of them would conceal it because they knew that these matters could not be publicized. It was even shameful to talk about it aloud. Children, on the other hand, did not have so many concerns and were more frank. Zheng patted her forehead with his palm and clicked his tongue. "Silly girl, you're not even as tall as a human. Do you really think that you're as beautiful as a fairy? In this world, not every man is as lustful as your stepfather. If you were 18 or 19 years old and asked this question, I would be willing to think about it. But now you have the appearance of an 8 or 9-year-old. Even slightly normal men would look down on you." Kang Xintong blushed and blurted out, "This servant is already 12 years old." Zheng rubbed the top of her head. "The wind is strong. Let's go back." "Yes." Kang Xintong could not help but bury her thin and flushed face into the cloak. The corners of her eyes were slightly red. Zheng's mansion was much larger than Kang Xintong's stepfather's, but it was also much simpler. Whether it was the main door or the main hall used to receive guests, there were no decorations. It was very simple. There were only a few carvings on the walls. It looked simple but exuded comfort and elegance. On the other hand, Kang Shintong's stepfather could not wait to display all the gold and silver he won from the war outside to let outsiders see how rich his spoils of war were. Thinking of this, Kang Shintong could not help but let her imagination run wild. Teacher LV said that her mother was also a spoil of war. Then, her stepfather always liked to dress her up beautifully, and let her attend the small gatherings of those gossipy madams. Was it also a kind of show-off? Showing off his spoils of war was a noble madam from an aristocratic family. She had good looks and self-restraint. There was nothing bad about her from head to toe. On the other hand, those madams were always dwarfed by her mother. From tomorrow onwards, you shall live in the residence as my adopted daughter. Lu Zheng took the hand warmer from a servant. A burst of warmth drove away the coldness on his fingertips in a domineering manner. He said, "There is no third master in the mansion except for me and you. If there were any shortages, he could go straight to the housekeeper. Except for the old maids who do the cleaning, the servants in the mansion are basically men. You are a girl, so you should have a few maids to take care of your daily life. Tomorrow, I will ask the housekeeper to pick a few maids from the broker house. You can choose two to stay with you." Kang Shintong stood on the spot. Her hands covered in red and purple frostbites were so skinny that they looked like skin and bones. She clutched the sides of her clothes tightly. Why is Mr. so nice to me? She didn't suspect that LV Zheng had any bad intentions, but she didn't understand why LV Zheng was so good to her. It must be known that in this world, even if parents raised their children, their original intention was to continue the bloodline and continue the family line. People who were truly selfless were probably as rare as phoenix feathers and qilin horns. Lu Zheng said, "There's no special reason. To be honest, it's probably because I've been bored recently." Kang Shintong was stunned. What kind of reason was this? Even if she didn't understand LV Zheng's identity, even her stepfather, who had a bad temper and couldn't be persuaded after he was drunk, was respectful to LV Zheng. It could be seen that LV Zheng should be an important person. Shouldn't an important person be busy with a myriad of affairs and have no leisure time? Lu Zheng said again. Why do you care so much? It's not a bad thing for you anyway. You have nothing for others to plot against you. Kang Shintong said in embarrassment. I overestimated myself. I've made a fool of myself in front of Mr. LV Zheng asked the housekeeper to tidy up the guest courtyard for Kang Shintong to stay for the time being. Kang Shintong saw that he didn't leave and couldn't help but ask a few more questions out of curiosity. Did Mr. say that you already have a family? LV Zheng slowly blew on the freshly brewed tea to cool it down, and poured a cup for her. Kang Shintong had led a hard life these years, but she was pampered and spoiled in the early years. The moment she sat down, her temperament couldn't be faked. It was obvious that she had received an excellent education. LV Zheng said casually, Yes, but they're not here. It's too messy here. I'm worried. Kang Shintong let down her guard. She looked quiet, but her mouth loved to talk. She chattered nonstop. LV Zheng couldn't help but think of someone. Kang Shintong knew her limits. She didn't probe too much into LV Zheng's situation. Instead, she changed the topic to Jiang Pingji. Her hands clutched the teacup tightly and she said softly, Mister, can you tell me more about Lu Shi? LV Zheng wasn't surprised. She used to be my classmate. Kang Shintong's eyes were big to begin with. At that moment, her eyes widened even more because of her shock. Classmate? But isn't she a girl? How could she be your classmate? LV Zheng said. She was disguised as a man by her father since she was young. She only came out in broad daylight many years ago. Are the bystanders blind? They can't tell that she's a girl. Kang Shintong had just finished speaking when she saw LV Zheng's indescribable gaze. She suddenly realized that she had said something wrong. She hurriedly tried to salvage the situation. Mister, I didn't mean that you. It's normal that they couldn't recognize her. After all, no girl would be like her. At that time men were still very feminine. Jiang Pingji blended in very well with them. Little did they know that she was the dream girl of many young and ignorant gentry girls. LV Zheng seemed to have thought of something. His expression twisted for a moment. Even though he hadn't spent much time with Jiang Pingji, She had successfully left a nightmarish shadow in LV Zheng's heart. Even though he was hurt, LV Zheng didn't deny everything about Jiang Pingji. Lu Shi didn't have much of a reputation when he was young. I went to Hejin County to ask around. Most people only vaguely knew that there was such a Langjun. He lived in the inner residence for a long time. The teacher was a famous scholar in Dongqing Wei Yuan. I couldn't find out more about him, LV Zheng said. He showed his talent at the age of 12. He trained the troops, cleared the bandits, and became Yuan Jing's disciple. After 3 years, Dongqing was in chaos. The 3 tribes of the northern borderline were aggressive. Lu Shi's sister was betrothed to the 4th prince of Dongqing, Wu Majun. She represented her father, Lu Shi, to send her off. Not long after, she was put under house arrest in Shangjing. House arrest? Kang Xintong exclaimed. LV Zheng said. This involved the struggle between the 2 factions in the Dongqing court. The reason was more complicated. In order to stabilize his power, the Dongqing emperor ordered the gentry to send their descendants to Shangjing as hostages. If you're interested in it in the future, you can study it. Then how did she get out? LV Zheng said. I don't know what method she used to get out. Before I saw her move, there was an earthquake in Shangjing. The earthquake in Shangjing caused the royal family to move the capital. They abandoned the deserted capital and moved to Qinzhou. They also abandoned the people on that land. Chapter 1650. Starting from the lowly county magistrate of Xiangyang district, she led people to clean up the mess, quell the chaos of the Tsingyi army, then annihilate the Red Lotus group and unify the entire Wanzhou. Then came the alliance meeting at Huangshui. She joined forces with the alliance to fight against the fake emperor, Prince Changshu. She led troops into Qinzhou to rescue the emperor. Her identity as a woman was exposed in court. Not only did she not lose the position of magistrate of Wanzhou because of her gender, but she used her military power to force people to recognize her as the magistrate of Wanzhou. She entered Chongzhou and sent troops to the northern borderline. Step by step, from Xiangyang district to Wanzhou, then to the overlord of the entire north. The Su brothers lost their lives in Shanqing one after another. Huangsong suffered a crushing defeat, leaving behind a grudge in Changya. Zhanjiang Pass resisted Zhongzhao's Nieliang. Zhangzhou's naval forces defeated Yang Tao. In just a few words, she described the situation of the world. Kang Xintong listened attentively. She clenched and relaxed her fists on her knees, completely ignoring the pain and itchiness of her frostbite. Lu Zheng didn't expect Jiang Pingji to do so many things over the years. She talked about them one by one until his mouth was dry. She lived a life that others couldn't even dream of in 10 lifetimes. Kang Xintong said. She's the only one in the world. I'm afraid other women won't be able to reach her in their lifetimes. That's natural. If every woman jumped up and down like Lu Shi, wishing for the world to be in chaos, how can the world be peaceful? Lu Zheng didn't expect Kang Xintong to become the second Jiang Pingji. She couldn't do that. But, don't limit your vision to stepfather. If you really want to climb higher, then set your sights higher. For example, Lu Shi. She couldn't become the second Jiang Pingji, but she could become the best version of herself. Kang Xintong hadn't met Jiang Pingji yet, but the latter had left the deepest and most colorful stroke in her heart. Her impression was deeper than anyone else's. If Wei Xi found out that Kang Xintong had been recommended by Lu Zheng and made the future Red Lotus Saintess Jiang Pingji's fan, this recommendation was too vicious. Perhaps An Chui would also doubt his life. Was Lu Zheng his advisor or a spy Jiang Pingji planted by his side? He didn't hear wrongly. The 2 malignant tumors that led the Red Lotus case that should have happened in the future had knelt. The world had just settled down, and His Majesty only had his eldest daughter, Jiang Yan. She had repeatedly wanted to make Jiang Yan the crown prince, but she was obstructed by various parties. On the surface, she was the imperial censor, but in reality, she was also interfered with by the scholars and the commoners. Everyone always said that His Majesty was still in the prime of his life, and that he would live for 10,000 years in the future, so there was no hurry to appoint a crown prince. In fact, he was just stalling for time, hoping that Her Majesty would have another child, perhaps a boy. At that time, everyone would elect the prince as the heir apparent. Perhaps His Majesty would be persuaded. More than a year after the establishment of the Jiang dynasty, Her Majesty became pregnant again. The court seemed calm, but in fact, undercurrents were surging in the dark. All the forces had their own plans. Looking at it now, Wuxia felt that Her Majesty was the one who was the most scheming, bullying her own subjects in various ways. When he was in the middle of a happy birthday, the remnants of the Red Lotus group rose from the ashes, and even spread their teachings to the officials' back residences. Some people with ulterior motives had tried to use the Red Lotus group to harm Her Majesty and Jiang Yan. The Red Lotus group had also used them to open the door to infiltrate the palace and plan an assassination. The Red Lotus group was very good at picking the time. It happened to be the day when Her Majesty launched the happy birthday. Even though he later found out that this was all done on purpose by Her Majesty, and that the whole situation was part of her plan to kill the disobedient people in the court, Wuxia was still so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. This religious assassination was also known as the Red Lotus case. The leader of the Red Lotus group was the grandson of Wu Liba, the sage of the northern borderline. Of course, this fish that had escaped the net was killed by Wuxia in advance during the Battle of the Northern Borderline. The other leader was the Virgin of the Red Lotus group, a woman who used to go by the name of Kong Xintong. The remnants of the Red Lotus group were wiped out, and Kong Xintong was also caught. What shocked Wuxia was that after this woman was caught, she almost escaped from prison. Someone helped her escape, and someone wanted her dead after careful investigation. In a sense, Kong Xintong was a little awesome. Her Majesty, who was sitting calmly on the fishing platform, ate melon seeds and watched the show. At the same time, she threw a thick file of information about Kong Xintong. Kong Xintong was born into a noble family in Nansheng. When she was young, she and her mother were captured by the southern barbarians and suffered a lot. Because her mother covered for her, Kong Xintong struggled to grow up to the age of 13. At the age of 13, her mother died, and her identity was exposed. In order to seek a better life for herself, she had no choice but to use her beauty to seduce the leader of the southern barbarians. With the help of the leader's power, she killed the barbarians who had once taken her. After 2 years of peace, Chui forced the southern barbarians into a desperate situation. Before he ordered a massacre, Kong Xintong disappeared. When she reappeared several years later, she became the Virgin of the Red Lotus group, an underground cult. No one knew where Kong Xintong learned some treacherous sorcery and deceived the people. She began to infiltrate the inner residences of the officials and developed followers. Wu Liba's grandson ran the Red Lotus group and propagated its teachings. Kong Xintong used these followers to attract more people to become her subjects. Some people joined the Red Lotus group because of her beauty, while others joined because of the Red Lotus group's secret power. Like a rolling snowball, the Red Lotus group grew stronger in a short 2 or 3 years, forming a huge network of connections. Wuxia still remembered Her Majesty's complaints. This child is so beautiful, but she ran off to engage in multi-level marketing. How stupid is she? How did Her Majesty find out about the Red Lotus group? Although the Red Lotus group had developed quite a lot, they were all operating in the dark. The court officials they had drawn in had also infiltrated from the periphery. They were very careful in their actions. Her Majesty was busy with court affairs. She had been expecting a happy birthday for the past few months. She did not have the energy to care about the Red Lotus group. Facts had proven that Her Majesty was a little monster with exuberant energy. Her plans to plot against the Red Lotus group and the restless aristocrats and commoners in the court began more than a year ago. Do you still remember your birthday last year? Wuxia said. I remember. Her Majesty said, that day when I went to the Spring Square to listen to Huanyang sing, I saw Zheng to go to the wine shop next door and get drunk. Although he looked confused, Wuxia still listened carefully, trying to analyze the relationship between Fu Wang getting drunk and the Red Lotus group. Zheng Tu quarreled with his wife. Logically speaking, I should not interfere in the family affairs of the officials. But since I saw it, I have to ask about it. It would not be good if serious business was delayed because of family affairs. Her Majesty looked for excuses for gossip with a serious face. After asking carefully, I found out that Zheng Tu's subordinate had secretly presented him with a beauty. At the same time, many unspeakable rumors reached Zheng Tu's wife's ears. That wife was very angry and said that she was seeking death. Although Zheng Tu returned the beauty, his wife was still sad. Fu Wang's wife was naturally Huijun in this life. Although their experiences were different, they had the same ups and downs. In the end, she became Fu Wang's wife, which caused people to talk about for a while. Because of this, Fu Wang's wife was quite low-key and almost never appeared in public. The beauty presented by his subordinate was Kang Xintong. Fu Wang refused the temptation, but his wife closed the door in his face. After getting drunk, Fu Wang complained to Her Majesty that he had been cheated by an immortal. That woman is beautiful, but my wife is not the slightest bit inferior. Am I, Fu Zhengtu, the kind of person who forgets his wife when he sees love? When Her Majesty heard this, he took it seriously. Fu Wang's wife was the first lady in terms of appearance. If she was not the slightest inferior to her, the effect of bribing Fu Wang would be greatly reduced. Her Majesty went back to investigate and found out that the Red Lotus group was involved. Chapter 1651. What he said was true, but Wei Xi was not sure how true His Majesty's words were or how much he was joking. If it was in his previous life, Wei Xi would have believed it 100%. He wouldn't have dared to doubt it. In this life, the more he understood her, the more Wei Xi knew how deep her heart was hidden under her cynical appearance. He thought that Her Majesty's plan against the Red Lotus group was probably earlier than what she said. She could see through people's hearts and control the overall situation. As her enemies, they often didn't even know how they were plotted against. To be honest, it wasn't clear whether the courtiers were lucky or unlucky to have met such an emperor. Whether she was a lord or an emperor, her scheming and strategizing didn't lose out to any counselor. She didn't lose out when it came to scheming and plotting against the entire court. Sometimes Wei Xi even imagined that if it wasn't for the fact that Her Majesty's energy was limited, she might be able to carry the entire chaotic world by herself. This could be seen from the court records after the establishment of the Jiang dynasty. As the banker, she would definitely win. As someone who boasted about Her Majesty and Her Majesty, Wei Xi could boast about her even with his eyes closed. Wei Xi was Jiang Pingji's fan leader and the chief instructor of the Internet Water Army. It was normal for him to boast about Jiang Pingji, but Lu Zheng was more confused. As in Chui's counselor, Lu Zheng had unintentionally helped Jiang Pingji sell several copies. In the end, he had even turned the future leader of the Red Lotus group into a fan. That was a wonderful move. Of course, that wasn't the best part. The best part was that Kang Xintong was determined to treat Jiang Pingji as her idol for life. She wanted to be her only fan. LV Zheng smiled with relief. He was indeed Master Yuanjing's student. He was good at teaching and educating people. Wasn't this rebellious and Chinibu awakened by his strong medicine? It's good to have ambition, but you have to think clearly. No matter how high Lu she stands or how far she goes, she's a rare existence among women. She can be a role model, but you can't be too obsessed with her success. The world treats women harshly. Maybe you've worked 10 times harder to be on par with a man who has worked twice as hard. It's far from the results you expected. Lu Zheng gave Kang Xintong a heads up to prevent her from falling behind. Even so, you won't change your mind? Kang Xintong was still young and couldn't fully understand Lu Zheng's words, but she could hear how serious and solemn he was. After careful consideration, Kang Xintong nodded heavily. She didn't expect to become as powerful as her idol, but she wanted to live with dignity. Kang Xintong wanted her mother to see what was the most dignified life for a woman. May I be so bold as to ask Mr. to show me the right path and teach me how to achieve my wish? Kang Xintong bowed to Lu Zheng without saying a word. Her slightly perplexed eyes were now filled with stubbornness and pleading. LV Zheng raised his hand and pressed her shoulder. She looked at him expectantly and cautiously. Call me godfather. His own child was still crawling, so Lu Zheng planned to adopt a foster daughter to satisfy his fatherly cravings. At the same time, he could also practice and learn how to be a qualified father. Hearing Lu Zheng's words, Kang Xintong instantly understood and called out, godfather. LV Zheng gladly agreed. Kong Xintong bowed again joyfully and said loudly, "Godfather, please accept a bow from your daughter." Coincidentally, the housekeeper had already tidied up the courtyard. LV Zheng arranged for Kong Xintong to rest. He planned to think about how to carve this unpolished jade into the best work of art. He was used to staying up late, so he was still full of energy the next day. Kong Xintong, on the other hand, was a little sleepy. Everything that happened yesterday was too dreamy. She couldn't fall asleep after lying down, afraid that it would be a dream when she woke up. LV Zheng didn't suspect anything and thought that the child was unfamiliar with the bed and wasn't used to it. On this end, the newly adopted father and daughter ate breakfast together, but they didn't know that Kong Xintong's mother suffered at the same time. Her snow-white skin was left with a pair of green and red fingerprints. 2 palm prints were very swollen, and her entire face was swollen. It was as if a perfect painting had been carelessly smeared by a naughty child, losing its beauty. The person who hit her was none other than Kong Xintong's stepfather. Her stepfather was drunk last night, and promised to send Kong Xintong out in a daze. When he woke up the next day, he regretted it. He had secretly coveted Kong Xintong for 2 years, and originally planned to bring her in after a year. Who knew that the fruit he had been looking forward to for 2 years would be taken away by LV Zheng? He respected LV Zheng and naturally didn't dare to blame him, but his anger had to be vented. Because of this, Kong Xintong's mother suffered. Although he was an illiterate boorish man, he still had a meticulous side. With a little tidying up, he could guess who was behind this. Kong Xintong's mother was a woman he had doted on for several years. He was usually very satisfied with her, but who knew that this woman also had disloyalty? Kong Xintong had always been doing the lowliest menial work, and didn't have the chance to come to the front yard, so her range of activity was limited. He didn't believe that if it wasn't for this woman's arrangement, Kong Xintong, who had always been imprisoned to do menial work, would have the chance to be taken away by LV Zheng in the front yard. In his anger, he slapped Kong Xintong's mother twice, causing her to see stars and her ears to hear the sound of a stream. "Bitch, your jealous face is really hateful." He had a murderous look on his face, as if he could rush in front of her and strangle her to death in the next second. Kong Xintong's mother took a long time to recover. A bloody taste filled her mouth and her molars were loose. "Langjun, please forgive me. Why would I be jealous of my niece?" She endured the nausea of the world spinning and crawled to his feet. She hugged his calf and begged, "Langjun, you don't know. It was clearly that little bitch who heard that Master LV was a guest at your residence, and had the thought of playing up to him. She put in a lot of effort to climb up to him. I'm really wronged." As she spoke, she cried as if it was really the case. The man's heart softened for a moment, but he still lifted his leg and kicked her away, leaving behind a sentence. "Lock yourself in the backyard and reflect on yourself. If there's a next time, I'll cut off your head." He had been looking forward to it for 2 years, but in the end, it was all for nothing because of a woman's jealousy. He was depressed to death. The more unobtainable something was, the more people yearned for it. He deliberately sent people to LV Zheng's residence to find out the situation. It would be best if LV Zheng took Kong Xintong as a concubine. These days, it was considered elegant to treat guests as concubines and give each other concubines. He could use a young and beautiful girl to exchange for Kong Xintong. If one was not enough, then he would get a pair. He never thought that LV Zheng would really take Kong Xintong as his adopted daughter. This adopted daughter was not a godfather and goddaughter, who hung a sheep's head and sold dog meat, but a real father and daughter. In other words, if he continued to covet Kong Xintong, he would covet LV Zheng's daughter. It was true that he cared about Kong Xintong, but he would not offend LV Zheng because of a little girl. He could only let this matter go. Chapter 1652. Jiang Pingji didn't know that Lu Zheng was diligently cultivating his loyal fans. After the new year, the originally relaxed atmosphere dissipated and was replaced by solemnity and tension. Since the assassination of the Nan family in Fenzhou, Jiang Pingji had changed so much that she was like a different person. At first, everyone was not used to it, but they got used to it after a while. Just as Wei Xi had said, their lord had grown up and become sensible. Because of Jiang Pingji's timely change, she accidentally extinguished the original hidden danger and avoided a potential crisis. As long as everyone was united, they were confident that they could tear the whole world apart, let alone in Shui. A few days after the new year, Jiang Pingji called for a meeting. The topic of the meeting was naturally how to get rid of Shui. Yes, Jiang Pingji was pure and unpretentious. She told everyone that she had suffered a loss at Shui's hands last year. If she didn't get back at him this year, she wouldn't be able to take it lying down. She didn't know what euphemism was. One could imagine how their lord's reputation would be if these words were recorded in the annals of history. Among everyone, only Wei Ci was worried for 3 seconds. Yang Si and the others had long given up on treatment. Whatever. Turning their heads, not only Jiang Pingji, but the others were also rubbing their fists and getting ready to do something big. If there are no objections, it's decided for now? Jiang Pingji looked around and took in everyone's expressions. After waiting quietly for a while, she repeated her question. For now, we'll send troops to conquer Shui before the spring plowing. Does anyone have any other opinions? Regardless of whether it was Jiang Pingji or the others, most of them agreed to start the war before the spring plowing. Only a few wanted to wait until the spring plowing was over. Everyone had their own reasons. Jiang Pingji listened carefully to different voices and analyzed the pros and cons of each opinion. In the end, she decided to send troops before the spring plowing. Her decision didn't attract opposition from the officials. Instead, it caused the idle people to be puzzled. They hadn't been following the livestream for so many years for nothing. Naturally, they knew how important ancient farming was. Unless they had no other choice, both sides would wait until the spring plowing was over before starting the war. Spring plowing was too important to the ancient people who depended on the weather to make a living. Wasting a year's spring plowing was equivalent to a year's worth of food going down the drain. The probability of famine in the following year was greatly increased. Understanding this, they couldn't understand Jiang Pingji's choice. Guali Guiduo. Isn't spring plowing very important? If I remember correctly, the host was in a tight spot last year. Under such circumstances, shouldn't she place more emphasis on this year's spring plowing? If we start the war before the spring plowing, it would affect not only the enemy but also our side. In the salted people's eyes, this choice was no different from suicide. Common people do not benefit themselves, and both sides suffer. Tudo feitio. I'm a little confused too. I don't understand why the host is taking such a risk. And seems to have the advantage. But after careful analysis, I feel that the host still has a large chance of winning. Couldn't they fight steadily and surely? Why did they have to use such a method? Gui s jiang, wan jiang, jiang yang king gui kai guo fengxiao. I seem to have guessed it. Host, is this related to Shui's fortification last year? Last year, in order to make things difficult for Jiang Pingji, Shui had deliberately given Nanxing and Sheng prefectures to her. On the surface, Jiang Pingji had the upper hand. She conquered the 2 prefectures without much effort, but she didn't know that 70 to 80% of the grains and young men in the 2 prefectures had been forcibly conscripted and gathered by Shui. Had the upper hand, leaving Jiang Pingji with 2 prefectures to deal with. She had to pay for nearly 1 million people's grains and winter supplies. She also had to prevent the local gentry in the 2 prefectures from taking the opportunity to cause trouble. Not only did it cost money, but it also took a lot of effort. What about Shui? He had a great winter. Not only did he have a bigger purse, but he also became a father. Gui Gu Feng Xiaolong. Many people remembered when he mentioned this. However, what was the connection between Shui's fortification and Jiang Pingji's abandonment of spring plowing? Naturally, there was a connection. Jiang Pingji gave up the spring plowing to attack Shui. She only abandoned the spring plowing in Nanxing and Nanqing prefectures. The plowing in Dongqing and Beizhou, northern borderline, was not affected, but Shui could not. He plundered a lot of grains from the 2 prefectures last year, but the young men he took with him had to eat too. If the spring plowing could not keep up with the harvest this year, there would definitely be a food shortage. When an army went to war, a lack of food was almost equivalent to losing half of the war. If everything went smoothly, Shui would not last until this autumn. Jiang Pingji intended to end the war quickly. She wanted to take advantage of his weakness and kill him. After dealing with Shui, she would turn around and take care of Zhongzhao, speeding up the pace of unifying the world. While everyone was discussing the details, Jiang Pingji briefly explained her intentions to the salted fishes. Some salted fishes were stubborn. They felt that Jiang Pingji did not need to be so anxious. Steady attacks were the way to go. Some salted fishes supported Jiang Pingji's choice unconditionally. Of course, there was a small group of salted fishes who felt that something was wrong, but they could not put their finger on it. When everyone was discussing how to distribute the troops, they were shocked to discover that Jiang Pingji was not in the starting lineup. Jiang Pingji, who had been fighting at the front lines all year round, was actually in the middle of the army? Gaoju Pingxi Shipi Daki. Wait. Streamer, why aren't you at the front lines anymore? I'm not used to it. After following the livestream for so many years, their favorite segment was to see Jiang Pingji persistently wanting to go to the front lines. The civil and military officials tried their best to stop her. They had a heart attack, but they had no choice but to accept Jiang Pingji's willfulness. Such an interesting segment was gone today. Not only were the salted fishes not used to it, but Yang Saifengzhen and the others were also at a loss. They looked at Jiang Pingji, and Jiang Pingji looked back at them with a serious expression. Both parties looked at each other for more than 10 seconds. The air fell into an awkward and strange silence. Do you have any other opinions? Jiang Pingji glanced at the entire setup. There should not be any loopholes. Why did everyone look like they were stupid? Why did they not go and prepare for battle after receiving the military order? Why were they here staring at her? My lord, did you miss something? Li Yin asked cautiously. What did I miss? I didn't miss anything. What did I miss? Jiang Pingji looked puzzled. Fu Wang suddenly coughed awkwardly. He cupped his fists and bade farewell. Time to go, time to go. Fu Wang left. As if awakened from a dream, the others got up in twos and threes. After leaving the main tent, Li Yin still had a dreamy look on his face. My lord has really turned over a new leaf. Bah! What do you mean by turning over a new leaf? Isn't this pretty good? Go and do what you have to do. Yang Si slapped Li Yin's shoulder, interrupting him to prevent him from saying something even more appalling and stupid. My lord's ears are very sharp. Li Yin nodded repeatedly and left in a hurry, as if there was a monster chasing him from behind. Jiang Pingji. Chapter 1653. Did these people think she was deaf? If they really wanted to make things up behind her back, they could at least do it from a distance. At such a close distance, what was the difference between that and making things up in front of her? Yang Si and the others are becoming more and more like princesses. They're super hard to please. Jiang Pingji couldn't help but shake her head. She had a helpless but doting expression. In the past, she always wanted to lead the vanguard troops and wanted to use herself as a general. They tried their best to stop her, almost crying and hanging themselves. When they couldn't stop them, they would show a wronged and helpless expression, making people feel guilty for no reason. Now that she had learned from her painful experience, she planned to make a fundamental change. Even honest people like Li Yin couldn't get used to it. It made it seem like it was her fault from the beginning to the end. Jiang Pingji felt wronged, but she didn't say it. Because all the officials had retreated, they didn't know that they were being blamed by their lord. Instead, it was the salted fish who felt it was unfair for them. Listen to what Jiang Pingji said. Shiring-chan. I can see that the streamer really doesn't know what's going on. Bao Xian. The little princess is the one who feels wronged. Doesn't your conscience hurt when you say that? Sitting on the grave and enjoying the moon. Oh, the streamer is a big pig trotter. She really should let little Rong Rong and the rest come back to listen to her and see her true colors. They're the ones who should feel wronged, okay? Shuishuich was Hong's hoodie. Previously, people told me that the streamer has changed. I didn't believe it, but I didn't expect it to be true. Anyone who had some understanding of the streaming room knew Jiang Pingji's bad temper. As the saying goes, it's easy to change mountains and rivers, but hard to change a person's nature. It was quite torturous to let an unrestrained person who loved freedom be confined to the rear and watch others do as they pleased. The salted fish always thought that being diligent was her limit. When there was a war, she would definitely show her true colors. Who knew that she had really changed? She didn't even play in her favorite battlefield. You Abba. Don't you feel uncomfortable watching this? Jiang Pingji said. I don't feel uncomfortable, I'm just not used to it. The 7th Corps was the Federation's first line of defense against the enemy. It was the sharpest knife. It was dispatched to wherever there was war. Even if she didn't like war, she had gotten used to it after so many years. Fighting was as common as eating and drinking to her. To have a person like her, who was born to fight, retreat to the rear and watch others rush to the battlefield, facing dangers that she didn't know if she would survive or not. She who had combat strength couldn't personally kill the enemy. Instead, she had to suppress the restless bloodthirst in her body. No matter how she looked at it, she wasn't used to it. However, even if he was not used to it, he had to get used to it. Jiang Pingji took a deep breath and suppressed that feeling. Your Abba. You'll have to get used to it sooner or later. Speaking of which, aren't you worried that something will happen to them on the battlefield? The old chief knew what kind of person Jiang Pingji was. She loved the battlefield. Other than the bloodthirst in her bones, it was mostly for the sake of others. The more enemies she killed, the fewer enemies the others had to face. Naturally, the pressure on them would lessen. Of course, she couldn't say these mushy words out loud. Outsiders could only experience it for themselves. As expected, Jiang Pingji denied it. Why should I worry about them? They're not 3-year-old kids. They don't need me to look after them on the battlefield. A general is a profession where one's head is tied to one's belt. If they're afraid of death, they won't be able to make a living, Jiang Pingji said. Worry? There's no shadow of it. Your Abba. Ha, a woman who says one thing but means another. Jiang Pingji didn't think that she was saying one thing but meant one thing. There was no one else in the world who was more consistent than her. I, Jiang Pingji, have never been a hypocrite. I say whatever I want to say. She said it righteously and sternly. The old chief coldly replied with 2 words, haha. The old chief is a decent person. Don't learn bad things from the group of salted fish in the streaming room. You should be dignified and dignified. Under the scourge of 5 million salted fish, Jiang Pingji couldn't look directly at those 2 words. Because behind every haha was, I bought a watch last year. Seeing the sarcastic haha, she knew that the old chief had learned a lot from the streaming room. Was his life so leisurely after retirement? Your Abba. Then I'll say something else, Jiang Xiaojiu. I advise you to have some sense of propriety. Jiang Pingji. At the end of the meeting, the starting lineup for the match against Nchui was basically confirmed. Apart from a few familiar faces, Jiang Pingji also promoted a few young faces. However, newcomers meant that they were young and inexperienced. It was easy for them to be taken advantage of when they met with veterans on the battlefield. Under normal circumstances, many people preferred to use experienced or capable veterans. For new generals, unless they had outstanding military exploits or impressive combat abilities, they had to wait for a few years. It was rare for Jiang Pingji to promote newcomers as frequently as she did. Why? Previously, she was short of people and had to promote newcomers. Now that she's not short of people, shouldn't she prioritize safety? Could it be that she's still guarding against us? Yang Tao rarely came up with a conspiracy theory, but his conjecture was so crude that it made people speechless. It doesn't seem like it. Even though we haven't had much contact, based on our observations these days, Lu Lanting isn't a two-faced villain. If Jiang Pingji was the kind of villain who said she would promote people to important positions, but secretly schemed against them, Yang Tao wouldn't have such a good impression of her. It's not about the lack of people. Yan Lin wanted to explain, but seeing that Yang Tao was confused, he gave a simple example. If Zhengze was a talented general who had been suppressed for many years, and had no hope of being promoted, what would you think? After a long time, even if you don't resent him, you'll lose the will to improve. You'll either be depressed and resentful of the world, or completely dispirited and muddle along. If the enemy sent someone to instigate a rebellion and gave them a bright future, very few people wouldn't be tempted. Lu Lanting boldly promoted newcomers and gave them a chance to be promoted. Not only could she nurture young talents, but it was also a way for her to win people's hearts. That's why there's less infighting under Lu Lanting's banner. Most infighting in the world was due to political views, while the rest was due to conflicts of interest. In other words, there were too many monks and too little porridge. With so many monks trying to snatch the same bowl of porridge, they got angry and naturally started fighting over it. How could this conflict be resolved? Most of the feudal lords tried to mediate between the two monks. They tried to persuade one monk to live harmoniously, and the other monk to focus on the bigger picture. There was no solution to the question of who should get the bowl of porridge. This method was to smooth things over. In the end, the fight would still be fought. Jiang Pingji was different. When others fought over a bowl of porridge, she did not step forward to mediate. Instead, she took out a few steamed buns. Even though it was risky, Yanlin thought it was a good way to solve the root of the problem. I see. Chapter 1654. It was still a chilly spring, and the snow had just melted. The air was filled with a cold chill. However, the coolness of the outside world could not cool down in Chui's rising fury. No one expected that Jiang Pingji would use a method that harmed others without benefiting herself. There was still half a month before the spring plowing. This made Chui wonder if the other party had gone mad, to be so hot-tempered. Even a war had to be fought according to the basic laws. Jiang Pingji actually destroyed the spring plowing. Was she planning to fly into the sky? It was common knowledge that spring plowing was the first major event of the year. And Chui had sent people to prepare early on, expending a lot of manpower and resources. As long as this year's harvest was good and there was enough food, Jiang Pingji had nothing to fear. He had never expected that she would play her cards so unconventionally. She would risk her own spring plowing to attack in Chui. By now, she had already crossed the river and torn down in Chui's fence. When In Chui heard the news in the morning, her happiness from the new year was washed away. When did this happen? Why did you only report it now? And couldn't help but ask again, thinking that she was hallucinating. The soldier who delivered the message repeated nervously, "My lord, 3 days ago, Lu Shi's troops attacked our border town and forced their way across the Bailing River. It happened so suddenly that the defending general was patrolling outside and carelessly let the enemy take advantage of a loophole. In the end, he had no choice but to retreat 30 miles. And Chui heard it clearly now, and his face turned green. Bailing River was a river that lay between Jiangpingji and Inchui. The surface of the river was 7 miles long, which was about 3,500 meters. This river was also one of the main streams of water in Nansheng. It irrigated both sides of the river and fed countless people. Because the soil here was fertile and easy to water, coupled with the fact that Nansheng was located in the south, the climate was humid, and they could harvest crops twice a year. And Chui still hoped that this place could alleviate the food shortage and give him the capital to fight Jiangpingji for a long time. He never expected that Jiangpingji would suddenly make things difficult for him. Not only did she disrupt the spring plowing, but she also seized this piece of fat meat. And Chui was slapped awake by reality. His face was ashen, and 2 flames of anger danced in the depths of his eyes, as if he wanted to burn everything he saw. In his anger, and Chui used his sleeve to sweep away all the things piled up on the table, causing them to crash to the ground. Everyone heard the news and rushed over, just in time to see it. No one dared to provoke her at this time. They could only secretly glance at Hua Yuan, hoping that he would say something to appease them. Hua Yuan did not let them down. He stepped forward and bowed. "My lord, please calm down." And Chui said, "How can I calm my anger? Do you know what Lu Shi did? She's crazy." Hua Yuan naturally knew what had happened. Otherwise, he would not have been called over. Things have already been decided. No matter how angry my lord is, it doesn't change anything. For now, the most important thing is to think of a way to deal with Lu Shi's army. At the same time, we need to hold the defending general accountable for his negligence. Hua Yuan's light words had changed the subject, and Chui had nowhere to vent his anger. The others in the tent felt a chill run down their spines when they heard this. Why? According to the content of the battle report, the defending general did not neglect his duty at all. Jiang Pingji sent a large number of troops to attack the place, and the defending general could not defend it no matter how hard he tried. Furthermore, the two sides of the Bailing River were wide open, and there were basically no guarded passes. Jiang Pingji was also an expert in land warfare. The Steel Horsemen under her command had even defeated the 3 tribes of the northern borderline who had once dominated the grasslands of the northern borderline. How could a mere 20 to 30,000 soldiers trip her up? It was the biggest joke in the world. Hua Yuan's way of changing the subject had calmed An Chui's anger, but it had also brought an undeserved disaster to the defending general. An Chui calmed down a little. Panting heavily, he asked, "Do you have a good plan?" "I'm incompetent. I can't share my lord's burden." Hua Yuan blamed himself, then changed the topic and shifted the blame. Hearing this, everyone secretly cursed him for being cunning. He said, "But my lord has a lot of talented people under your command. You can gather everyone's wisdom and strength to come up with a countermeasure." An Chui glanced at the hesitant officials around him. His mood, which had just improved, fell again. Apart from Hua Yuan, the others were like good-for-nothings who could not do anything. They were like worms who ate the lord's salary but could not share his burden. From the moment they entered until now, apart from Hua Yuan who dared to speak in spite of his anger, the others were like mutes, not uttering a single word. Therefore, although Hua Yuan did not come up with a plan, An Chui was even more satisfied with him. He even sighed in his heart that Hua Yuan was the most loyal and devoted person in the world. Lu Zheng? Lu Zheng's presence was getting weaker and weaker. He had been in the background during the new year. How could An Chui think of him? Everyone had been forced to do something beyond their abilities by Hua Yuan. After offering their suggestions, they did not get anything out of it, because An Chui only cared about Hua Yuan. After they dispersed, everyone left the main tent in 2s and 3s, intentionally or unintentionally isolating Hua Yuan. There was something strange about this matter. Although Hua Yuan had made many contributions, in terms of weight, Lu Zheng was clearly more important. In the end, his lord An Chui seemed to have taken the wrong medicine and trusted Hua Yuan wholeheartedly. Especially after the new year, he almost wanted to worship Hua Yuan. From time to time, he would talk to him by candlelight, and the two of them would sleep together. Even Lu Zheng had not valued him this much back then. There were even people who disliked Hua Yuan who mocked him behind his back. Hua Yuan was not the #1 strategist in An Chui's tent at all. He was clearly the #1 strategist in someone else's tent. Of course, these words would not reach Hua Yuan's ears. They had all seen this man's cruelty. How would they dare to rush to their deaths? On the other hand, Lu Zheng, speaking of which, they had not seen Lu Zheng for a long time. He did not appear even after such a huge incident had happened today. What was Lu Zheng doing? Some people said that his heart had been hurt by An Chui. Now that he had been frozen, he was disheartened and staying at home. Some people said that Lu Zheng had been suppressed by Hua Yuan and had fallen into depravity because he was bored. He was addicted to women and could not extricate himself. No one knew that Lu Zheng was addicted to his daughter and had no heart for proper business. In fact, before Jiang Pingji's troops had forcefully crossed Bailing River, he had a premonition. Outsiders did not understand her, but Lu Zheng knew her temperament. It was not difficult to deduce her actions based on her temperament and style. When the incident at Bailing River came, Lu Zheng's first reaction was to frown. Something was wrong. He could deduce this even when he was at home. There was no reason that Hua Yuan did not know about the mental illness. If he knew, why did he not warn An Chui in advance and send troops to guard against it? Lu Zheng felt uncomfortable all over when he thought of that lunatic Hua Yuan. Carry it first. Come back in 2 hours for a spot check. Lu Zheng assigned the homework casually and strode away. Kong Shintong held the heavy bamboo slips and recited them loudly without any complaints. Kong Shintong was born into an aristocratic family. Her biological father had also hired a teacher to teach her. This helped her build a solid foundation, so she learned quickly. Compared to Kong Shintong's enthusiasm for learning, Lu Zheng did not have much energy in the following half a month. He even missed his lectures. Kang Shintong asked with concern. What's wrong, godfather? Could it be that something troublesome has happened to you? Lu Zheng frowned and said, the situation at the front line worries me. Hua Yuan seemed to have taken the wrong medicine again. Recently, he had been working but not putting in any effort. He had been slacking all day. Even Lu Zheng could see his problem, but he pretended to be deaf and mute and chose to stand by. This abnormality made Lu Zheng tense up. Chapter 1655. Compared to Lu Zheng's heaviness and worry, Kang Shintong's voice was much livelier. I happened to overhear it. I heard that the Duke of Lanting's morale is very high. Lu Zheng glanced at his adopted daughter indifferently and raised his hand to smack her forehead, telling her to watch her words. Kang Shintong was his adopted daughter after all. Why was she so excited when the enemy was mentioned? People who did not know better would think that Kang Shintong was Jiang Pingji's daughter. Kang Shintong's lips curled into a pretty smile. She was not afraid of Lu Zheng's warning at all. Perhaps it was because she had been eating and sleeping well these days. Her originally thin chin had become rounder. She looked more and more likable. Seeing her smile, Lu Zheng felt gratified and frowned at the same time. Even though he fed Kang Shintong chicken soup and told her that looks were innate and not to care too much, the reality was that reality had a natural malice towards good-looking women, especially in troubled times. A gentleman will not be imposing if he is not serious. No matter when, where, and who you are facing, you have to control your emotions. You can't be brash and give people the impression that you are frivolous and rude. Lu Zheng taught his adopted daughter seriously. He sounded righteous and strict, but in fact he had a lot of personal opinions. Kang Shintong looked like she was being taught, but she did not take it to heart. She had only smiled at her foster father just now. How was that frivolous, impolite, and reckless? Besides, father, a gentleman will not be imposing if he is not serious. Is this from the Analects of Confucius? Kang Shintong did have some basic knowledge, but the Analects of Confucius was too profound for her back then. The teacher that her parents hired had not even taught her that much. Recently, Lu Zheng grabbed her to revise the Analects of Confucius, but Kang Shintong was still at the stage of rote memorization. Lu Zheng said, a gentleman will not be imposing if he is not serious. He will not be firm if he learns. The meaning of this sentence could be understood literally, but Kang Shintong, who had always been intelligent, was surprised. Lu Zheng thought she did not understand and asked, what do you not understand? Feel free to ask. Kang Shintong took out a roll of bamboo slips and opened it for Lu Zheng to see. She pointed at the sentence on the bamboo slips. According to my adoptive father, a gentleman will not be imposing if he is not serious. Serious means sincere and solemn, but the note on the bamboo slips is not. Notes. The bamboo slips of the Analects of Confucius that Kang Shintong was currently using were the ones he had used when he was still a student. He had memorized every word on it by heart, so there was no need for him to flip through the bamboo slips again and again. If it wasn't for the fact that he wanted to teach Kang Shintong the Analects of Confucius, he wouldn't have taken out these bamboo slips. Although he hadn't read it for many years, he didn't remember what he had written on it. Bamboo slips were different from other materials. It was inconvenient to engrave words on them. And if one engraved too many words, it would shorten the lifespan of the bamboo slip. Because of his excellent memory, Lu Zheng rarely engraved any annotations on it. He curiously took the bamboo slip from Kang Shintong's hand and opened it to take a look. He discovered that the words a gentleman who is not heavy will not be imposing, next to the words petit bourgeois. The heavier one was, the fatter one was. Lu Zheng. In other words, according to the explanation, the meaning of this sentence was twisted into, if a gentleman is not fat, he is not dignified enough? Which bastard carved words on his bamboo slips? It was one thing to carve words, but wasn't he afraid that the saint wouldn't be able to hold him down if he explained it to the saint? Godfather, this annotation. Kang Shintong muttered softly. Was it carved by Godfather? Lu Zheng glanced at the handwriting and realized that it was somewhat familiar. He stared at it again and remembered who it was. No, it's impossible. Lu Zheng denied it thrice. Kang Xintong knew how precious books were. Her godfather didn't come from a good family background, so he should cherish it more. If the person who engraved the words was not someone he trusted, he wouldn't have the chance to create trouble on it. Therefore, she was curious. Which deity had made such annotations? Who was it? Lu Zheng threw the bamboo slip on the table and curled his lips. Who else could it be other than that foppish Lu Shi? That's right, the annotations were left behind by Jiang Pingji. Lu Zheng didn't know the specific time, but it was most likely before he left Langya County. Kang Xintong's little mouth opened slightly. She was stunned for a while, then she suddenly burst into laughter. The Duke of Lanting actually had such a cute and mischievous side when he was young. The expressionless Lu Zheng. Shouldn't a normal person's first reaction upon seeing such a ridiculous annotation be to say that Jiang Pingji was a bad student? But the person? Mischievous? What kind of description was that? She wasn't a fan filter. She was obviously blind. Lu Zheng suddenly felt a little remorseful. Did he overcorrect his goddaughter? She was his goddaughter, but she was a fan of Jiang Pingji. That was too much. Humph. Lu Zheng snorted in disdain. He took out a knife and a brush from his sleeve, ready to scrape away the nonsense Jiang Pingji had left behind. Unexpectedly, Kang Xintong refused. She grabbed the bamboo slip and hugged it in her arms. Her face was full of expectation, and her eyes were pleading. Let me translate. These were the words personally engraved by her idol. She had to keep them and not scrape them off. Lu Zheng held the knife and brush in his hand. He didn't know whether to take them or put them away. Kang Xintong took advantage of Lu Zheng's hesitation and hid the bamboo slip behind her. She changed the topic abruptly. Godfather, the situation at the front line isn't optimistic. Don't the others have any countermeasures? Lu Zheng was silent for a while. He quietly put away the knife and brush and resumed his serious expression. There are countermeasures. Although the people under the Lord's command have their own agendas, not all of them are mediocre. If that's the case, why are you so worried? If they have countermeasures, they naturally have the ability to solve it. Kang Xintong spoke rather bluntly. She had been with Lu Zheng for a long time, and had a deeper understanding of him. This godfather was good in every way, but Chui had eyes but failed to see and sheltered him. Why didn't Chui think about how her godfather had accompanied him through his lowest times? What was the difference between him and a scumbag who abandoned his wife when he struck it rich? Trash. Pig trotters. Kang Xintong didn't like Chui. She couldn't wait for him to die. Lu Zheng said, I'm afraid that someone has the ambition of a wolf. I don't know what evil plans they have in the dark. Kang Xintong didn't understand. Will the people under Lord Chui's command harm him? Lu Zheng sneered. Why not? Some people have lost their minds and gone mad. They can't be treated as normal people. If that's the case, will you remind Lord Chui? Kang Xintong asked carefully. Lu Zheng sneered. Remind? Ha. It was useless to remind him. Lu Zheng wasn't someone who liked to pester others. He was already disgusted by Chui's repeated suicidal acts. 2 days after this conversation, Chui gathered the army and prepared to set off. Lu Zheng, the background, was dragged along as well. Chui thought of Lu Zheng, not because he still had a conscience and cherished old friendships, but because of Hua Yuan's recommendation. No scumbag would think of himself as scumbag, much less think that neglecting someone else was his fault. What else could Lu Zheng be dissatisfied with if Chui was willing to put Lu Zheng in an important position again? In order to maintain this scumbag mentality, Chui had planned to have Lu Zheng guard the rear. In the end, this decision was sternly rejected by Hua Yuan. For Chui to leave a great talent like Lu Zheng behind in the rear was simply a reckless waste of God's gift. What does Hua Yuan want to do? What does he want to do? Hua Yuan sneered. Chapter 1656. Is Godfather going to follow the army into battle? Kang Xintong had been living in Lu Zheng's residence for a while now, and their relationship had improved by leaps and bounds. When she saw Lu Zheng instruct the housekeeper to pack his luggage with a grave expression, she knew that something had happened outside. She heard that the front line was extremely dangerous, and her godfather had been neglected by Chui for a long time. She didn't know why he was suddenly put in an important position. Hua Yuan recommended me to the Lord, so she ordered me to follow the army into battle. Stay at home and wait for me to return. You mustn't neglect your studies when I'm not home. You'll be tested when I return. Lu Zheng didn't have experience as a teacher, but he had experience as a student. His master, Master Yuanjing, had taught his students in the same way back then. There was a limit to how much he could relax. Even though Kang Xintong was a self-disciplined, studious and practical child, she was still a teenager. Her self-control wasn't as good as an adult's, and it was easy for her to be distracted by the flowers and plants of the outside world. Lu Zheng was worried that Kang Xintong would neglect her studies when he wasn't around. I will remember Godfather's teachings. Kang Xintong agreed, but she asked in confusion. It's a good thing that Lord Chui put you in an important position again. Why does Godfather look so preoccupied? Is it because of Master Hua Yuan's recommendation? She had vaguely heard servants mention that her godfather and Hua Yuan didn't get along. However, her godfather didn't admit it himself, so Kang Xintong couldn't discuss it in private. I have some conflicts with him, and we've never been on good terms. Lu Zheng didn't avoid the topic and said directly. As the saying goes, there must be something wrong when something is out of the ordinary. He's not a kind-hearted person. Who knew if his expression of goodwill was genuine, or just another scheme? I'm worried that he's up to something again, so I have to be on guard. However, the Lord trusts him so much that I can't do anything to him. The conflict between Hua Yuan and Lu Zheng was well known. He had been suppressing Lu Zheng both openly and secretly, so how could he give him a chance to turn things around? He was afraid that there was some kind of conspiracy, such as luring the tiger away from the mountain, and taking advantage of LV Zheng going to the front line to stir up trouble in the rear, or that there was some kind of trap waiting for LV Zheng to jump into at the front line, or that there was some kind of conspiracy at the front line. All of these were possible. Even though LV Zheng's suspicions were very reasonable and well-founded, it also proved one thing. Hua Yuan, a dangerous individual with a split personality, had left a deep psychological shadow on him, so much so that LV Zheng was a little paranoid and always had a conspiracy theory about everything. When Kang Xintong heard this, she had a bold idea. Your daughter has a matter that I hope Godfather will agree to. She swallowed nervously and said tentatively, It's already unfilial of me to not share my father's burden when he's with the army. I don't dare to let him worry about me when he's at the front. If that's the case, why don't you? Under Lu Zheng's stern gaze, Kang Xintong's voice gradually became softer and softer, until it could not be heard. Her little head also drooped down. Why not what? Why didn't you say anything? Lu Zheng asked with a spurious smile. His eyes that seemed to be able to see through one's heart were filled with understanding. You don't dare to say it? Then let me guess, and see if I've guessed what you're thinking. Do you want to follow the army to the front? Even if Kang Xintong's idol was Jiang Pingji, he couldn't be so bold if he wanted to imitate his idol, could he? Jiang Pingji had a sizable female battalion under her command. Over the years, they had risen to fame and made a name for themselves, making their enemies tremble in fear. However, Chui did not have such conditions. Kang Xintong was a girl. If LV Zheng did not take good care of her, who knew when something would happen to her? The front line was full of swords and sabers. It was too dangerous. I advise you to give up on this idea as soon as possible. LV Zheng quite liked this clever and obedient adopted daughter. How could he bear to let her go to the front line and court death? At the end of the day, it was Lu Lanting's fault. He did not teach good things and taught bad things to children. LV Zheng smiled in his heart and patted the little man. The two words Lu Shi were written on the man's body. His black resentment was almost overflowing. Her foster father's rejection was within Kang Xintong's expectations. She gave a fawning smile, got up from the mat, and went behind LV Zheng. She rubbed his shoulders attentively and said softly, Foster father, you are indeed my foster father. I can't hide my cleverness from you. Humph. Carrot. It was useless even if the little girl had a sweet mouth. LV Zheng did not fall for it verbally, but he enjoyed it in his heart. The front line is very dangerous. There's chaos everywhere. If you're not careful, you'll lose your life. It's for your own good that I'm not letting you go. Moreover, the army camp is not as simple as you think. There are a bunch of rough and barbaric men there. I dare not guarantee your safety. You're a delicate girl. You'll easily get into trouble if you go. Zheng tried to dispel her thoughts. His idol was so arrogant because he had the ability to survive at the front line. That person could enter an army of thousands without batting an eyelid. She did not have the ability to do so, so she did not want to die. Of course, Kang Xintong's courage was worthy of recognition. Ordinary girls would not have the courage to say that they wanted to go to the front line. Kang Xintong's expression darkened when Zheng saw through her thoughts. She immediately became determined, and her eyes were filled with determination. She really wanted to go to the front line. How could she grow faster by staying in the rear and enjoying the protection of a greenhouse? She was not afraid even if she might face the dangers that Zheng mentioned. She also wanted to see how big the world was, as Zheng had said. She immediately begged Zheng, "Godfather, you're always thinking of me. I'm afraid that I'll let you down. What's so good about the front line that it's worth all of you going there? Don't you know that people will die? Other than me, there's someone else like you," Zheng said. "Isn't Lucy the one who taught you bad things?" "Humph, the culprit of all conflicts," Kang Xintong said seriously. "Godfather, I've always remembered what you told me. However, reading 10,000 books is not as good as walking 10,000 miles. No matter how much I read, it's still not as good as seeing with my own eyes. I'm short-sighted, so I naturally have to see more." Zheng sighed helplessly. He raised his hand and pulled Kang Xintong up, making her kneel on the ground look unbecoming. "You can go, but you have to promise me that your own safety is the most important." If she went to the front line, Zheng could not guarantee Kang Xintong's safety. Whether it was a blessing or a curse, she would have to bear it herself. Since Kang Xintong was so persistent, Zheng could not force her. Of course, if his own flesh and blood disobeyed him like this, he would probably explode and break their legs. Kang Xintong did not expect Zheng to be so easy to talk to. She was already prepared to be rejected for the second time. Thus, when Zheng agreed, she almost did not react in time. When she came back to her senses, she quickly said, "Thank you, Godfather." Chapter 1657. Zheng made it sound serious, but in fact it was not that dangerous. Kang Xintong was young to begin with, so it was not out of place for her to disguise as a man. Zheng also ordered people to keep an eye on her at all times. As long as Kang Xintong did not seek death and go to places she should not go, she would not be in any danger in the military camp. Unless the enemy directly launched a sneak attack on our camp, then there was nothing we could do. Moreover, Zheng was a strategist, not a general. He spent most of his time in the barracks, so he could definitely protect this little girl. Zheng did not hide Kang Xintong's matter from Shui, and informed him in advance. Shui had vaguely heard that Zheng had adopted a daughter, but he did not expect that he would bring her to the military camp. "Take it with you, as long as it doesn't interfere with important matters." Shui had no objections, so the matter was settled. The army set off. Zheng followed Shui on horseback, but Hua Yuan was nowhere to be seen. Seeing this, Zheng felt even more uneasy. He pretended to casually ask the people around him about Hua Yuan's whereabouts. "Why don't I see Hua Yuan?" Zheng whispered to a strategist he was on good terms with. His eyes were still wandering around, trying to find a familiar figure. He said, "The Lord can't leave the flower abyss. He can't wait to take her wherever he goes. Why can't I see her today?" The other party asked, "You don't know?" Zheng shook his head. "I really don't know." The other party continued, "This time the enemy is coming in full force, but Lucy still sent out his troops despite the spring plowing. It's obvious that he's made up his mind. If we want to defend against the enemy, we don't know how long this battle will take. I'm afraid we won't have enough rations. The Lord has sent Hua Yuan to collect military provisions and supplies." Zheng's heart skipped a beat. "Is there not enough food? How much rations do we have? How long can it support the army?" Lu Zheng had gradually become disconnected from political affairs during his time in the cold. His understanding of the military camp had fallen behind. Roughly speaking, we should be able to last until early winter. Why is it only early winter? According to Lu Zheng's estimation, the provisions they had in reserve could last them until the end of spring and the beginning of summer next year. Of course, it wouldn't matter even if he couldn't hold on. Rations were precious in any period of time, not to mention in this chaotic world where rations were the hard currency. If there really was a food shortage, not only would they have to think of ways to increase income, but they would also have to do their best to reduce expenditure. If there was no other choice, then he could only use special methods to get through this difficult period of time. Even so, Lu Zheng still felt that Chui and Hua Yuan were too wasteful. During the days when he was frozen, the two of them were quite extravagant. They were like the foolish sons of a landlord. The more foolish people have, the faster the money comes. The foundation that Lu Zheng had accumulated over the years was going to be destroyed by them. He had a rough idea in his heart, but he didn't expect the truth to be worlds apart from his conjecture. We should have been able to last longer. After all, our army benefited a lot from the incident last year. But, all these years, Lu Xi had swept through the lands. Hadn't he relied on the elites under his command? Now that the army was at the borders, the Lord was extremely fearful of her. She was afraid that the army would not be strong enough, so she had been recruiting soldiers and training elites. Last year, the Lord sent people to select 150,000 strong youths from the two prefectures and send them to the military camp. 150,000. Lu Zheng's voice almost cracked. Was he hallucinating? Are you sure it's 150,000 and not 15,000? This is simply nonsense. Lu Zheng didn't care that Chui was not far away. He widened his eyes and scolded them. Not only were Chui and Hua Yuan prodigal sons, but they were also kicked in the head by a donkey? How could there be such a good thing in this world? One wanted the horse to run fast, but also wanted the horse to eat less and drink less? These youths were all mouths that were crying piteously for food. They ate grains. They were neither wooden oxen nor immortals. They couldn't eat wind and drink dew. If they were trained as elites, their daily meals would be at least twice as much as that of ordinary soldiers. There were so many mouths to feed all of a sudden. Did Chui really think that food didn't need money? The incident last year that he mentioned was referring to the incident where Chui fortified the walls and cleared the fields to trick Jiangpingji last year. He took all the benefits for himself and plundered the food reserves of the two prefectures. In the end, he threw a group of old, weak, sick and disabled people to Jiangpingji and made her worry about food. In Lu Zheng's opinion, Chui shouldn't have wanted those youths last year. It would have been enough to just plunder the food reserves. He should have thrown the youths, the weak, the sick, and the disabled to Jiangpingji, making her worry about food. If she could solve it, she would be considered capable. If she couldn't, she could send someone to secretly instigate the youths to revolt and attack the granary to snatch food. It would also be a good opportunity for Lu Zheng to see Jiangpingji being pressured into a terrible state. It was a pity that Chui refused to listen. He had already been bewitched by Hua Yuan. The little b** teach. 150,000 more mouths to feed out of thin air. How will there be enough food for our army? Chui had previously annexed the various feudal lords of Nansheng and absorbed their military forces. The number of troops under his command was already very large. The youths from the two prefectures that had just been absorbed had no combat experience. They were only there to wave the flag and shout battle cries, and at the same time, they were also there to give the enemy heads an experience. However, Hua Yuan wanted to challenge Lu Zheng to a duel. Due to various disadvantages, Lu Zheng couldn't defeat him. His master, Chui, was also greedy and couldn't bear to part with the youths. He was afraid that these youths would become Jiangpingji's daggers against him. So he insisted on taking them home and digesting them himself. Look, now you know the consequences of being too greedy and inconsiderate, right? You've lifted a rock and dropped it on your own feet. Lu Zheng felt a little stuffy in his chest, as if someone had stabbed him with a knife. His lord Chui used to be so reliable. Why did he become so arrogant after he became rich? He could be arrogant if he wanted to, But he should at least wait until the dust settled on the enemy, right? The enemy hadn't even knelt down. Yet he was the first to lose his cool. Was he planning to give his head to Jiang Pingji? Lu Zheng cursed in his heart, but he didn't know if he should say it. Lower your voice. Do you want to die? The man tugged at Lu Zheng's sleeve and warned him in a low voice. He secretly raised his head and glanced in Shui's direction. He realized that Shui was looking in his direction. His pitch-black eyes were devoid of any emotion. Under such a gaze, he couldn't help but shiver. He quickly lowered his head to avoid eye contact. Lu Zheng tightened his grip on the reins and snorted coldly in a low voice. It's time for you to change your personality. It's not like you don't know the Lord's temperament. If you insist on being stubborn, you'll be the one who suffers. The onlooker sees the game more clearly than the person directly involved. Why was Shui close to Hua Yuan and distant from Lu Zheng? It wasn't because Lu Zheng wasn't capable enough. It was clearly because Lu Zheng's temperament had made his lord, Shui, unhappy for a long time. He felt that Lu Zheng might be put in a difficult position again. As it turned out, Shui wasn't as petty as he thought. Indeed, he didn't like Lu Zheng, but he wouldn't ignore the bigger picture and leave such a capable person like Lu Zheng to rot in a corner. Now was the time to use people. Lu Zheng still had to use him when he needed to. Chapter 1658. It was the 6th year of Taikong. It was a chilly spring. Spring had arrived in the south of Yonghua, but the northern border was still snowing. The snow was up to his ankles. Nieyang thought that after death, his soul would return to the netherworld. He would walk on the bridge of helplessness, drink Mangpo's soup, forget the past and be reborn. In the end, he was still too young. Nieyang was the legitimate son of the Nie family's third branch. Although he was not valued by his elders, he was well-dressed and had never suffered. He was sent to Jiangpingji by Nieqing to die. He only had time to say his last words before he was decapitated. He felt a chill on his neck. After some time, he regained consciousness. Not only was his neck cold, but his limbs were even colder. It was as if he was in an ice cave. He struggled to open his eyes and saw the broken roof of the house. When he turned his eyes, he saw that the room was pitch black. Nieyang was shocked. He was surprised that hell was like this. He used all his strength to push himself up from the bed. He was shocked. Underneath him was a bed, made of dried grass and firewood. His body was covered with something black and smelly. His hands, which were exposed from his sleeves, were cracked and frostbitten. Not only that, but he also found that his feet were bare. His ankles and soles were blue from the cold. Could it be that Lord Lanting was so stingy that he didn't even leave clothes for me? Nieyang murmured. As soon as he said it, he was shocked by his own voice. In his previous life, Nieyang's voice was not as elegant as Nieqing's, but it was full of youthful vigor. What about now? He sounded like he was about 6 or 7 years old. Although his voice was hoarse, it could not hide his childishness. At that moment, Nieyang realized that his limbs had shrunk. He used all his strength to get up. From the corner of his eyes, he saw white snow outside the broken window. He could vaguely see well-dressed people walking by. Nieyang was at a loss for a while. He panicked and realized that the situation was different from what he had imagined. Could it be this isn't hell? When Nieyang tried to go out, he felt a sharp pain in his head. An unfamiliar and slightly blurry memory filled his brain. It really isn't hell. After a long while, Nieyang revealed a shocked and panicked expression. He looked like he was about to cry, but he wasn't. He was at a loss. Nieyang died at the hands of Jiangpingji. After his death, his soul did not return to the underworld. Instead, he was reborn in a completely unfamiliar dynasty. This body was that of a beggar. His parents died of famine, and he relied on stealing and the support of kind-hearted people to survive. Life was so difficult. The child beggar tried his best to survive, but he was still frozen to death by the sudden snowfall last night. When he woke up again, his inner core had become Nieyang. Of course, he was happy to be reborn, but in this situation, he might as well die. Nieyang sneered. You've done so much evil in your life, but you still have a chance to start over. Ha, this god. He really didn't know if God was treating him well or torturing him on purpose. This body was that of an orphan with no parents, no name, and no family. He was penniless and had no home. He was frozen to death in this broken temple. The people nearby called him dog, and the children called him fool. With such a terrible life, if he didn't have the opportunity, he would probably never be able to turn over a new leaf. Nie Yang was, after all, an ancient person. His thinking was more inclined to believe that this beggar was actually his reincarnation. But for some reason, the soup of Mungpa didn't work, and it made him remember his previous life. According to this line of thinking, his current life situation could be explained. He had done so much evil in his previous life, so there was no glory or wealth in his next life. He could only live a poor life. Nie Yang's lips curled into a somewhat mocking sneer. In his previous life, he had been born into a gentry family, and was the son of a respectable noble family. Now he was a beggar. Even if he worked hard, at most he would be ranked among the poor, and people would look down on him. Thinking about it this way, he felt indignant. However, it was too early to think about this. He had to solve the problem of food and warmth first. Nie Yang thought about it, and followed his memory to the only private school near the village. The examination system in this world was not quite the same as the evaluation system he knew. It was the imperial examination to select scholars. The form of the imperial examination was somewhat similar to the teaching and promotion system implemented by the Duke of Lanting in Wanzhou. However, fortunately, it was the imperial examination and not the evaluation system. Otherwise, Nie Yang would never be able to climb up in this lifetime. The evaluation of scholars was based on family background and appearance. Talent was actually secondary. Nie Yang's identity in this life was only a beggar. He couldn't even be considered poor. Just based on his family background, he would forever be rejected from officialdom. He still had a chance in the imperial examination to select scholars. Nie Yang endured the cold and hunger, and secretly peeked outside the window of the private school. He caught a glimpse of the content of the teacher's lecture, and felt a bit more satisfied. Although the history of this dynasty was very different from what he knew, the characters in both were the same. Nie Yang didn't have to be illiterate anymore. The private school teacher also noticed the beggar outside the window, but didn't pay much attention. This beggar often came over to pick up the students' leftovers. He looked very pitiful, so the teacher would occasionally soften his heart and give him alms. The teacher randomly tested a few students on yesterday's homework. Every student stuttered, which made him very disappointed. At this time, he heard a murmur outside the window. He listened carefully and didn't miss a single word. He looked again and saw that it was the beggar. "Do you know how to recite?" the teacher asked. Nie Yang was secretly happy, but he said, "I remember everything just now." The teacher was slightly surprised and asked with interest, "Then what else can you recite?" Nie Yang opened his mouth and recited the few analects of Confucius that the teacher said today. It was strange that Confucius and Mencius were still alive in a strange dynasty. How stubborn. The teacher murmured, "How smart. What a pity. If he had money to go to school and receive education, he might even be able to pass the imperial examination. Unfortunately, he was a beggar who didn't know his next meal. No matter how talented he was, it would only be a waste." Nie Yang showed his doubts and asked the teacher about his confusion about one of the analects of Confucius. The teacher smiled indifferently. "What confusion can you have? It was good enough that he could recite it word for word. How could he have his own opinion? If it was the previous beggar, he probably couldn't. But Nie Yang was different. In terms of talent and learning, 10 teachers together might not be a match for Nie Yang. Why? Nie Yang was born in a noble family in his previous life. The educational resources in front of Nie Yang were the best at that time. He received an elite education and never lacked writing brushes, ink and paper. The teachers were all famous scholars, and he could read the rare books of the poor. Not to mention that Nie Yang was talented. Even if he was stupid, with so many educational resources, he would be much better than the ordinary poor. The teacher in front of him had studied hard for more than 10 years and failed several provincial examinations. He was discouraged and came back to teach. Nie Yang's acting skills were beyond doubt. Even if he was at a disadvantage, He could still create the most suitable opportunity. The teacher was shocked after hearing this. Nie Yang said again, I can do all kinds of dirty and tiring work. Teacher, please do me a favor and give me something to eat. The teacher frowned. This is not a charity hall. Although he didn't look down on Nie Yang, the strong sarcasm in his words could be heard by anyone who wasn't deaf. Nie Yang had always been a smiling tiger in his previous life. All his emotions were hidden deep in his heart, and no one could see them. He knew how to prioritize things. Right now, survival was the most important thing, and he could still endure this little bit of setback. Although I'm not talented, I know shame. Nie Yang lowered his posture and said word by word. If you have any work like copying and engraving, I can do it. It's so cold now. If I don't find a way out, I'm afraid I won't be able to survive until spring. Nie Yang had a good eye for people, and the teacher in front of him had a good reputation in the surrounding villages. He could play the emotional card. Sure enough, the teacher heard Nie Yang's words and asked him, You can copy and engrave? Nie Yang nodded and showed his 2 frostbitten hands. He said awkwardly, I can write. I used to secretly watch the teacher teach and practice with a branch for a long time. But my hands are a little hard from the cold. If I write with a pen, I'm afraid it won't look good. The teacher looked down at Nie Yang's hands. They were almost black from the cold. The cracks and frostbites made people feel sorry for him. Thinking of this, he felt pity for him. If this child could really copy well, it would be fine to give him some food to eat. Words were no proof. Even if the teacher was a kind person, he would not believe Nie Yang's words. He still had to test his handwriting. The teacher did not think that a child who had not gone through systematic learning could write well. Nie Yang felt relieved when he saw the teacher's attitude soften. He endured the pain and washed the stains off his hands and arms with ice and snow. Then he rolled up his sleeves and started writing so that the table, paper and pen would not be dirted. Nie Yang's attitude was sincere and kind. The teacher liked him a lot. Nie Yang's handwriting was good. After all, he was a student of a famous calligrapher. It was just that he had changed his body and his wrist strength was not good enough. He could not write as well as he did in his previous life. Even so, the teacher was still shocked. Nie Yang was from an aristocratic family. He was best at writing 2 types of characters. One was the popular, Wanti and Zhongzhao, and the other was the MOT. These 2 types of characters were created by Zhongzhao's modern calligrapher. The person who created the Wanti was a woman from an aristocratic family. At that time, the 4 self-accomplishment classics for women had not been created. Women from aristocratic families had a high status. This lady's handwriting was charming and graceful. Many noble ladies followed her example. Many young aristocratic families who pursued fashion also liked to copy and learn. Nie Yang was also a fan. His Wanti was more charming than many women's. The calligrapher who created the MOT was Nie Yang's teacher. At the same time, it was also the character that Nie Yang wrote the most. This type of character was famous for being thick, square, and clear. Nie Yang studied the MOT to hide his true nature. After all, people said, calligraphy is like the person. One could see a person's nature through his calligraphy. Reality proved that this was nonsense. Nie Yang had learned 70% of his teacher's MOT. Outsiders thought that he was a gentleman. Who knew that he was a scheming villain? At this time, the calligraphy was naturally Nie Yang's best MOT. Did you really practice it yourself? The headmaster looked at Nie Yang with a complicated expression. He did not know that this beggar had such a talent. He had almost been buried. Nie Yang nodded and twisted his fingers pitifully. He said pitifully, I beg the headmaster of the academy to do me a favor and let me have a meal. The headmaster sighed. Forget it. I'll leave the copying and engraving to you. 2 meals a day. Is that okay? Nie Yang smiled. Thank you, headmaster. If I have a chance in the future, I will not forget your kindness. A chance in the future? The headmaster smiled and waved his hand. It's not that simple. Take care of yourself first. Why did Nie Yang set the private school as his goal? Because he needed a way out. He was not willing to be an ordinary person. If he did not work hard to find a way out, Would he freeze to death or starve to death in the ruined temple? The private school had some books. Nyeyang helped here. He could read the books and understand the details of this era. He could also solve the problem of food and clothing. He looked at the rice paper on the table and sighed in his heart. Although there was paper in his previous life, it was very precious and produced in small quantities. Many small gentry families could only use thick bamboo slips to carve words. At this moment, even a scholar from a poor family who taught in a private school could use such uniform and fine paper. It could be seen that the overall standard of this era was much better than in his previous life. His hands and feet were itchy and painful from frostbite, but Nyeyang did not seem to feel it. He began to copy as usual. At first he was not used to it. After a whole afternoon, he was much faster. After a while, the headmaster brought him a set of clothes that had been washed white. There were 2 wooden boxes on the clothes. You can wear this set of clothes. There is also some ointment for frostbite. The headmaster asked him, "Do you have a place to stay?" "I'm living in a ruined temple 3 miles away. That ruined temple is drafty. What's the difference between living there and living in the open?" The headmaster frowned. A ruined temple could not keep out the wind and rain. Living there would be courting death. "If you don't mind, you can stay in the woodshed. We'll decide when the weather gets warmer." Nyeyang's eyes showed gratitude. He said sincerely, "Thank you, headmaster." From that day on, Nyeyang lived in the woodshed of the private school peacefully. During the day, he diligently copied the books that the headmaster borrowed from everywhere. At the same time, he secretly recorded the contents of the books. The headmaster provided 2 meals a day, but the portions were always sufficient. Unknowingly, it was March. One day school ended. The headmaster went to the town to run some errands. Nyeyang did not have any tasks, so he lay in the corridor and took a light nap. When he opened his eyes, the sky was already red. The headmaster sat beside him and looked at him. "You've been here for more than a month, but I still don't know your name." Nyeyang said, "My surname is Nye, and my first name is Yang." His parents died early in this life and they did not have time to choose a name. Nyeyang did not know their surnames, so he simply used the surnames of his previous life. Nyeyang? There are many Westerners. The river is vast, and it flows northward. The headmaster smiled. It's a wonderful scene. After a pause, the headmaster asked him, "Do you have any other family members?" Nyeyang was startled and shook his head. No. He was already alone and deserted by everyone. How could he have any other family members? "When I heard you murmuring, Nyeching in your dream, I thought it was your living relative." The headmaster said regretfully, "You're very talented. If your family is willing to support you in your studies, you can still have a future in the officialdom. Even if you don't bring glory to your ancestors, at least you won't have to worry about food and clothing." When the headmaster said the 2 words, Nyeching, Nyeyang's face turned completely white, without any color. Ever since he woke up, he had been busy making a living. In the dead of night, he restrained himself from thinking about his previous life. Who would have thought that he was actually talking in his sleep? "What's wrong? Do you feel uncomfortable?" "Thank you for your concern, headmaster. I'm fine. It's just that I suddenly thought of my cousin and felt very sad." Chapter 1659. Spring left and autumn came, and winter and summer changed seasons. On the outside, Nyeyang looked like a young child, but on the inside, he was an adult with deep schemes. He helped the headmaster manage the private school, while absorbing the knowledge of this era, like a whale sucking in a dragon. The headmaster saw it but did not stop him. He even gave Nyeyang some advice occasionally. In his eyes, Nyeyang was destined to be an extraordinary person. If he had a good future, he would also benefit. When Nyeyang was 10 years old, the headmaster suggested him to try his luck by participating in the county-level exam. The county-level exam was divided into 3 stages: the county exam, and the academy exam. If he passed, he would receive food from the government every month. Even if he could not go further, he would still be much better than an ordinary person. Nyeyang said humbly, "I don't have a good foundation. I'm afraid I won't pass." The headmaster said, "The county-level exam is not as difficult as you think. With your current foundation, you should be able to pass." Participating in the county-level exam required complicated procedures. The headmaster told him to focus on his revision and ran around to complete all the procedures. Nie Yang watched from the side with an indescribable sense of melancholy. Whether it was Nie Qing or this teacher, they did not know what kind of bullshit the Real Nie Yang was. The headmaster lent Nie Yang some money and gave him a lift to participate in the county-level exam. As the headmaster expected, the county-level exam was not difficult. It was not a challenge for Nie Yang at all. He passed the first exam and became a gifted student. At the same time, he became the youngest in that year and was known as a genius. Nie Yang's life improved a lot since he was a gifted student. He stayed in the private school to make a living and spent more time studying every day. After preparing for the exam for several years, Nie Yang took the autumn county exam at the age of 16 and passed the top scorer. Then he took the spring exam and passed the top scorer. He performed very well in the palace exam, and the emperor wanted to help him pass 3 top scorers in a row. Thus, Nie Yang was promoted to the top scorer. He passed 3 top scorers in a row before he was 20. Suddenly, Nie Yang's social status rose and many people tried to rope him in. Outsiders all thought that Nie Yang would become arrogant because of this. Who would have thought that this little Zhuang Yuan would be able to keep his composure and conduct himself with the demeanor of a great family? If he was thrown into the crowd of nobles in the capital, just by looking at his temperament, it would be hard to tell that Nie Yang was once a beggar. He would look more like a naturally born rich noble. Nie Yang didn't get carried away because he knew very well that being the top scholar was only an entrance ticket to the officialdom, not a ticket to the finish line. How high he could climb in the future, and how much power he could control all depended on his future management. At the Jasper Forest banquet, many people wanted to see what this Zhuang Yuan, who had yet to reach the age of 20, looked like. Nie Yang wore a clear and harmless smile on his face as he walked among the nobles with ease. His every movement didn't seem like that of a bookworm who had studied hard, but more like that of an experienced official. Before the court examinations, Nie Yang had tried his best to gather information about the situation in the court. The current emperor's surname was Nie. He was 32 years old when he ascended the throne in the first year of Taikong. He had 5 sons and 3 daughters. The first 4 princes had already reached adulthood. Only the 5th prince, who was also the crown prince born by Empress Yuan, had yet to reach adulthood. Counting them, he was half a year older than Nie Yang. A few years ago, Empress Yuan had died of illness. The emperor had the intention of suppressing Empress Yuan's paternal family, the Duke of Xinghua. In addition, the 4 older princes had entered the court one after another after coming of age. There was a faint tendency to surround and attack the crown prince. The crown prince was only the heir to the throne of the empire. His privileges were only 1 level lower than the emperor's. However, he was still not the emperor and his life was in danger. Nie Yang had a faint smile on his face. In his heart, he was calculating which prince had the upper hand. However, his calculations still fell through when he heard the name of the crown prince. Nie Qing. It was actually Nie Qing. Nie Yang was very surprised. His hand trembled and wine spilled out. After the Jasper Forest banquet began, the emperor, the crown prince, and the other 4 princes appeared one after another. Nie Yang's expression changed over and over again. There was no other reason. The crown prince's face, figure, manner of speech, and temperament were almost identical to his cousin Nie Qing from his previous life. The difference was that his cousin Nie Qing was a bright and elegant scholar. Like the bright moon, he always had a faint smile on his lips. His every move was a role model for nobles. The crown prince in front of him was indeed similar, but there was a faint hint of melancholy between his brows. Nie Yang suppressed his wildly beating heart and kept his breathing steady. However, he could not bear to look away from the crown prince. Why were they so similar? Could it be that the crown prince was the reincarnation of his cousin Nie Qing? That was also possible. Nie Qing was born rich and did not do evil. It was reasonable for him to be reincarnated into the imperial family and become the crown prince. Nie Yang swallowed nervously. His hands hidden in his sleeves were sweating profusely. His fingers were almost twisted into a ball. "Cousin," Nie Yang murmured, his eyes welling up with tears. The others only thought that he was young and could not hold his liquor. After a few teasing words, they turned their attention to the ranking I and Tanhua. In the middle of the Jasper Forest banquet, Nie Yang caught a glimpse of the Crown Prince getting up to leave. He found an excuse to follow, but was blocked by someone. "Why is the top scholar here?" The Crown Prince revealed a suspicious look, but the vigilance in his eyes made Nie Yang instantly sober. He was not Nie Qing. No, it should be said that he was not the Nie Qing he knew. Nie Yang's heart raced, but he showed an embarrassed expression. He lowered his head and said in a low voice, "I can't hold my liquor. I drank a little too much just now, but I couldn't find a place to change, so I couldn't ask, so Your Highness, please forgive me for my lack of manners." The Crown Prince's expression eased. This was also Nie Yang's fault for looking so harmless that people could not raise their guard. Perhaps it was an ill-fated fate, but Nie Yang looked exactly the same in this life as in his previous life. He naturally knew how to show his harmless side. The Crown Prince's expression eased after hearing this, and he called for a palace made to lead the way for Nie Yang. As Nie Yang watched him leave, an indescribable feeling welled up in his heart. He owed so much in his previous life. Could he pay it all back in this life? After the Jasper Forest banquet, Nie Yang was appointed to the Hanlin Academy as a secondary class 6th rank. He was in charge of the nation's history, compiling records, and recording the emperor's words and deeds. Simply put, he was a secretary. This position was considered a high starting point for Nie Yang, who had a poor background. If he did not work hard, he would probably squat in this position for the rest of his life. If he did well and won the emperor's favor, then the role and power of this position would not be small. In fact, there were records of top scholars in the past who were secondary class 6th rank for their entire lives. The imperial examinations were just a ticket. After entering this officialdom, how high one could climb in the end depended on one's own ability. Nie Yang smiled and narrowed his eyes, not worried about his future at all. Even though Nie Qing said his temperament was not good, he had to admit that only people with this kind of temperament could do well in the officialdom. In comparison, he was more concerned about the Crown Prince. Nie Qing, Nie Yang murmured, a trace of determination flashing in his eyes. Regardless of whether this Crown Prince was the reincarnation of his cousin, he had to help him ascend to the throne. This way, perhaps they would not owe each other anything. Nie Yang's temperament was born for officialdom. In other words, he was born for this bowl of rice. In just half a year, he had seen through the emperor's thoughts and became a trusted official of the emperor. His future was limitless. The nobles in the court tried to rope in this new noble, and the 4 adult princes also tried to extend an olive branch to him. Nie Yang did not refuse, nor did he give a definite answer. He obediently did his job. Because he had become a Hanlin Academy scholar, Nie Yang and the Crown Prince had more opportunities to meet. Because they were close in age, they had more topics to talk about than others, and they could occasionally talk. After some contact, Nie Yang had a deeper understanding of the Crown Prince's position. In short, it was not optimistic. Empress Yuan was dead. His mother's family was continuously suppressed. The 4 older royal brothers were pressuring him step by step. And the emperor's attitude towards the Crown Prince was becoming more and more ambiguous. In such a situation where he was besieged on all sides, not to mention this Crown Prince, anyone else would be forced to become irritable. Nie Yang waited for the Crown Prince to recruit him, but after waiting for half a year, the Crown Prince did not even let out a fart. He really could not wait any longer, so Nie Yang took the initiative to attack, hinting that there was a problem with Nie Qing's camp. The Crown Prince was dazed for a moment, then smiled warmly. I heard that Zhongyi had refused 4 royal brothers in succession. This solitude was curious and guessed that Zhongyi had other plans, such as wholeheartedly loyal to imperial father. I did not expect that Zhongyi would like this solitude. This solitude's current situation will disappoint you. The Crown Prince was the heir to the throne, and was outstanding in all aspects. In Nie Yang's view, he was no different from his own cousin. If not for the surrounding scene reminding him, he would have thought that the two of them had returned to their previous life. Nie Yang's heart moved slightly. He had not thought that the crown prince would be so clear about his situation. Since it was so, why didn't he think of a way to save himself? In Nie Yang's view, the crown prince's recent attitude was somewhat passive. Your Highness's words are incorrect. You are the crown prince, the legitimate son of Empress Yuan, the heir to the throne, the rightful successor. Nie Yang said word by word. As long as your Highness is patient and wholeheartedly serves the emperor, father, the court and the people, how can the four princes surpass you? This was not passive resistance. This was called not changing, not fighting was fighting. Nie Qing's heart surged with waves of warmth, his eyes filled with rare sincerity. Grand Tutor, grandfather and the others also said similar things, but at that time, this solitude felt distraught and did not listen. When Zhongyi said these words, this solitude had a different experience. When the crown prince met his gaze, he felt an indescribable sense of familiarity. He had not been in frequent contact with this Hanlin Academy cultivator, but he unconsciously trusted the other, as if they were old friends from a previous life. If your Highness pays attention to the fight for the throne, you will be at a disadvantage, Nie Yang said. You are the heir to the throne. This is what you were born with. Why do you need to fight endlessly with the princes? There is no harm in looking at the world, the people's livelihood. This is the breadth of mind of an emperor. This subject thinks. His Majesty may be using this to train you. The foreign forces are powerful. They can help your Highness now, but in the future they will be a hindrance. The crown prince's brows furrowed, showing some anger. Nie Yang, do you know what you are saying? Sowing discord between him and his mother's family? Nie Yang said. I know very well. The crown prince said. Then you still dare to say it? Nie Yang said. There are some things that I know should not be said, but I still have to say them. This subject serves the emperor wholeheartedly. You are the legitimate heir, naturally I have to plan for you. The crown prince choked, but he could not deny that Nie Yang's words swept away the anxiety of recent years, calming his heart. I don't know why. The crown prince looked deeply at Nie Qing. This solitude has a feeling that you seem to be looking at someone. Nie Yang's smile became more difficult, and he said awkwardly, this subject will say something offensive. This subject has a cousin. He is also called Qing. Last year at the Jasper Forest banquet, this subject heard your Highness's name and couldn't help it. Thus, this subject feels especially close to your Highness. Please forgive me, your Highness. The crown prince did not expect this reason, and raised a hand to help Nie Yang, who was bowing an apology up. It's not a big deal, the crown prince said. Where is your cousin now? Nie Yang said. This subject made a mistake, and my cousin unfortunately died young. Before he died, he said to this subject, our friendship is severed, and we will not meet again on the road to the Yellow Springs. The crown prince was not angry at being offended, but rather curious what Nie Yang had done to make his cousin say such harsh words. No, it is not my cousin's fault. Although this subject has a clear conscience, to my cousin, this is indeed an unforgivable crime. Zhongyi is like a woman, crying just like that. Probably because the matter had been explained. The crown prince's attitude towards Nie Yang became much gentler. Nie Yang was shocked to find that he had unknowingly shed tears, and he immediately felt somewhat embarrassed. Actually, I will not hide it from Zhongyi. When this solitude first saw Zhongyi, there was a faint sense of familiarity. When Nie Yang heard this, his eyes widened in shock. Regardless of whether this crown prince was speaking the truth or not, Nie Yang decided to bet all his chips on him. As the emperor grew older, the fight for the throne became more and more serious, and Nie Yang took advantage of this demonic wind to soar. His official career was smooth, and the speed of his promotion was as fast as a rocket. At a young age, he sat in the position of Yuanfu, the head of the civil officials. Although his relationship with the crown prince was good, it was limited to a personal relationship. When it came to politics, they still fought. The civil and military officials were confused by this. The crown prince's presence was still very low. and his position seemed to be on the verge of collapse, but the old emperor did not show any intention of removing him. He was not anxious, but the 4 older princes were. Nieyang smiled coldly as he watched on. He had secretly schemed, causing the first prince, who had military power, to repeatedly make stupid moves, framing. Well, it could not be said to be framing. The first prince did have the intention of forcing the emperor to abdicate, but Nieyang had just materialized his thoughts and put them into practice. When the second prince supervised the imperial examinations, Nieyang had exposed a huge case of cheating in the examination that year, and successfully removed him from the imperial examinations. The third prince was the son of the imperial concubine, so he had some influence in the imperial harem and the court. Nieyang had started with the imperial concubine's mother's family. In this world there were only stains that had not been found, and there were no clean and dignified nobles. The fourth prince was even simpler. Nieyang himself was an Oscar winner, so how could he not see that the fourth prince, who seemed uncompetitive, was actually very scheming and scheming? Nieyang would not be merciful to his own kind. In just a few years he had defeated all the princes. He had eliminated his political enemies at the front, and the crown prince, Nieching, had taken care of things for him from behind, so that the old emperor would not find out. After 2 years, the old emperor abdicated as the crown prince. The court was shaken, and Nieyang was stunned. On the eve of his ascension to the throne, the old emperor had looked at him meaningfully, but the crown prince had asked Nieyang if he had any plans for the future. Nieyang thought for a long time. First, I will be a powerful official. Second, I will block my cousin on the road to the Yellow Springs. He said that we would not meet again on the road to the Yellow Springs, but I insist on seeing him. Nieyang looked into the crown prince's eyes and said lightly, whether he admits it or not, I have repaid what I owe him. The crown prince laughed involuntarily. What if he doesn't admit it? Chapter 1660. Lu Zheng might have known what Shui was thinking. However, what could he do even if he knew? Lu Zheng was a hot-tempered and arrogant man. He would not lower his bottom line just to please Shui, even if Shui was his lord. It wasn't that he didn't know why his relationship with Shui had become so stiff, and it wasn't that he didn't have a way to fix it. The reason why he hadn't taken any action was because he knew very well that the crux of the problem between him and Shui was that they had different ideals. There was no solution to this problem. Unless Shui was fundamentally changed or Zheng abandoned himself, he and Shui were destined to walk in opposite directions. For many people, in order to climb up, they could give up anything. Lu Zheng also wanted to stand out, but if the price was his bottom line, he would not agree. Thus, the current situation was more or less because Lu Zheng had no choice but to go with the flow. No matter how much Lu Zheng cursed his lord in his mind, he still had to do what he had to do. Ever since Shui had brought troops to support the front line, the expansion speed of Jiang Pingji's troops had been greatly curbed. After half a month of small-scale confrontations, the troops of both sides were in a stalemate. They were like fire and water, and it looked like an ultimate war was about to break out. Foster father, how could Lord Shui treat you like this? Kong Xintong was like a trapped beast, pacing back and forth in the tent. She stomped her feet twice as if she was venting her anger, her eyes wide open. Have you finished reciting today's copy of the Analects of Confucius? What are you angry about? Lu Zheng had lost a lot of weight these days. There were piles of bamboo slips and official documents on his desk. He rarely had the time to look up at his indignant adopted daughter. He put down his brush, rubbed his wrist, and sighed. Sit down. Don't walk back and forth in the tent. You're making foster father dizzy. Don't be angry. Your little mouth is so angry that you can hang a wine cup on it. How could Kong Xintong endure this? She had been staying in Lu Zheng's tent for the past few days. Even if she were to leave, she would bring guards with her to protect herself. Come here and help me tidy up these bamboo slips. Sort them out and tidy them up. Lu Zheng waved at Kong Xintong, trying to persuade his adopted daughter not to get angry so easily. There was really no need to be calculative with Shui. Kong Shintong was about to cry from anger. She hadn't come to the front line, so she didn't know that her foster father was in such a bad situation. And Chui, that pig trotter, was a complete scumbag. Did he really think that his godfather was a brick, moving wherever he was needed? The enemy's momentum was fierce, but it was only thanks to Ifu's ingenious plan and the arrangement of the troops that they managed to stabilize the situation, breaking the enemy's momentum and stopping their advance. As soon as the battle formation was stabilized, and Chui could not wait to throw Lu Zheng, who was supervising the battle, to the rear to deal with trivial matters. There were so many matters that Lu Zheng had to stay up all night to fight. Kong Shintong could not see anything else. She could only see that Chui had shamelessly taken credit and glory from his subjects. What a shameless pig trotter. Kong Shintong watched as her foster father lost weight. Even if he was busy, he still grabbed hold of her studies and answered her questions. How could she not be touched? His adoptive father was such a good man, so why was Chui so guarded against him? Did Chui really think that his foster father couldn't be anyone else but him? Godfather, your daughter is coming. Kong Shintong was about to say something, but she forcefully held back her words and obediently helped Lu Zheng share his burden. After busying herself for a while, and clearing away some of the bamboo slips that had piled up like a mountain on the table, Lu Zheng heaved a sigh of relief. He had the time to discipline his foster daughter. This is a military camp, and there are openings in all directions. Remember to be careful with your words and actions, lest the Lord hears what you shouldn't say. Lu Zheng lectured his foster daughter, with a stern expression. Kong Shintong hung her head dejectedly and obediently complied. Lu Zheng said, "Actually, it's fine if I'm not at the front of the battle formation. There are many talents in the Lord's camp. Naturally, he can stabilize the situation." Kong Shintong said, "You're kind. You're still covering up for them at this time." She had seen how good Lu Zheng was. In her heart, apart from her idol, Jiangpingji, Lu Zheng was the best. The outcome of the battle isn't something that can be decided by one person. At most, I've prevented them from being schemed against by the enemy, but you can't say that this is all my credit. Speaking up to this point, Lu Zheng paused and added, "Moreover, Luxi has yet to appear at the front of the battle formation." Kong Shintong's gaze was filled with doubt. This fellow Luxi, there are few who are better at fighting than him, and there are few who are smarter than him. Based on his past experiences, wherever there's a war to fight, he'll be there. Lu Zheng muttered. Looking at the enemies everywhere, Zhongzhao has basically been defeated. Other than the Lord's Nansheng, he has no other battlefield to join in the fun. The two armies have been at war for more than a month, but there's no trace of him in the various battlefields. It's really strange. In the past, Jiangpingji was too active. Now that she was suddenly as quiet as a chicken, Lu Zheng felt uneasy. Foster father, you mean? Kong Shintong thought that her foster father would say something groundbreaking, but unexpectedly. Either he's injured or he's pregnant. However, it's not the first time that Luxi has pretended to be sick to deceive people. He's so good at fighting, so it's ridiculous that he's injured or sick. On the contrary, the probability of him being pregnant is higher. Otherwise, I really can't think of why he hasn't appeared at the front of the battle formation. Kong Shintong was speechless. A normal lord wouldn't run to the front to fight with the enemy, right? Besides, why is the probability of him being pregnant higher than being injured? Can't he not appear at the front because he wants to be a good lord? Perhaps there's another plot? For example, to divert attention and sneak attack our army after deceiving everyone? Lu Zheng couldn't help but roll his eyes. The terrain here is open and flat. If there's a sneak attack, his tracks will be exposed before he even gets close. He'll become a hedgehog. No matter what, Lu Zheng was from Langyi Academy. He was one of Master Yuanjing's disciples. His foundation was solid, and his knowledge of setting up a camp was perfect. When he chose to set up camp here, he naturally considered the possibility of the enemy launching a sneak attack. Kong Shintong responded with an, "Oh," and faintly heard Lu Zheng muttering in a low voice. "Something's wrong. How can he be peaceful?" Kong Shintong said. Foster father, I have something to say, but I don't know if I should say it. If you don't want to say it, then don't. Lu Zheng imitated Jiang Pingji's words. Seeing Kang Xintong's face turn red and her anxious and flustered appearance, he couldn't help but curse Jiang Pingji for leading him astray. He changed his words and said, I'm just teasing you. Just say what you want to say. Don't hide it. Kang Xintong took a deep breath. Foster father, since you're close to the Duke of Lanting, and Lord Enchui treats you so poorly, why do you have to do this? Why don't you make use of our friendship as classmates and make contributions? No matter what, the Duke of Lanting will think highly of you. Lu Zheng's face turned cold, but he didn't get angry, and he didn't reprimand her. He just said with a cold face, compared to Fang Ji, you seem more like a lobbyist sent by Lu Shi. Whose foster daughter are you? Chapter 1661. Kang Xintong lowered her head timidly. There's no room for discussion. You're still young and don't understand. It's late, go and rest. Lu Zheng ordered for her to be driven away. Kang Xintong knew she had said something wrong and looked nervous and afraid. She bit her lower lip so hard that a mark appeared. Here, godfather, sleep early too. Don't tire yourself out. Kang Xintong retreated. Lu Zheng stared at the candlelight in a daze. This child is still too young. Lu Zheng sighed softly as if he was lamenting. If Kang Xintong had been calmer, she would have realized that Lu Zheng didn't despise her for saying such treacherous words. He didn't even reprimand her. It could be seen that Lu Zheng wasn't completely loyal to Enchui. He even had many complaints. Just as Lu Zheng had said, Kang Xintong was too young. Her thoughts were all natural and didn't know the twists and turns. Lu Zheng's personality determined that he wasn't someone who would surrender without a fight. Flattery was better than death. It was the same even if Enchui was a pig. After this conversation, Lu Zheng was no different than usual. Kang Xintong, on the other hand, felt guilty and regretful. She had been too impulsive. Even though it was for her godfather's good, he had assisted Enchui for so long. He couldn't just give up. Kang Xintong was regretting when a loud horn sounded outside the tent. The drums were beating like thunder, causing the sand on the ground to tremble. Her heart tightened. She secretly opened the tent's curtain and looked outside. Although she couldn't see anything from here, she could feel a murderous aura choking her throat and preventing her from breathing as she looked at the much emptier military camp and the sound of the war drums coming from afar. Kang Xintong looked at the hurried figures and murmured softly, "There's another battle. Is Godfather all right?" The battle had lasted from dawn to dusk. During this time, many wounded soldiers had been carried back from outside. Some of the wounded soldiers were bathed in blood and looked like blood people. Their original appearance could not be seen. Some of them had broken limbs and wreckage, and their human forms could not be seen. All of them were in so much pain that they wanted to die. Moans of pain flowed from the corners of their lips. Almost none of them had their arms or legs intact. Their bodies were covered in wounds. If she wasn't still alive, Kang Xintong would have suspected that she had come to the underworld. Kang Xintong obeyed Lu Zheng's warning and did not dare to run around. Every time the battle started, she would hide in her tent. While his heart was beating like a drum, he listened to the movements outside. Even though Jiang Pingji was her idol, she knew that once Enchui was defeated, the military camp would be in danger. Not only would she be in danger, but her godfather would also meet with misfortune. Therefore, every time there was a war, she would worry for a long time, from the moment the war drums sounded until the gongs sounded to retreat. He was worried that Jiang Pingji would lose and that his foster father would be in danger. She asked someone to leave some food for Zheng. She cooked a small stove to keep him warm so that he could eat hot food as soon as he came back. Perhaps it was because the enemy's offensive had become much fiercer and the war was in a tight situation. Lu Zheng did not deal with his chores for the past 2 days. He was summoned by Enchui for a meeting before dawn, and did not return even when the moon was high in the sky. Not knowing how the battle situation was, Kong Xintong yawned next to the small stove. When she woke up, she did not see Lu Zheng return. Could it be that we've lost today? Kong Xintong recalled the number of wounded soldiers she saw during the day. The number was indeed greater than the previous few times, and it looked even more tragic. She hugged her knees and waited for a while. Finally, she heard familiar footsteps coming from outside the tent. Kong Xintong was energized and her sleepiness disappeared completely. "Godfather," she called out. The tent flap was lifted. With the help of a few candles in the tent, she could barely see who it was. "Why aren't you sleeping?" Lu Zheng was slightly stunned. Kong Xintong had already stepped forward to welcome him. He subconsciously took a step back, but it was still too late. Kong Xintong smelled the scent of blood on his body, and her expression changed drastically. Kong Xintong asked hurriedly, "Is Godfather injured?" Lu Zheng raised his hand to cover his left arm, and shook his head. "Swords have no eyes in front of a battle. It's inevitable that he will be injured," Kong Xintong said. "Godfather is the military supervisor. He's in the middle of the army. How can he be injured so easily? Unless the formation of the three armies was broken by the enemy and the enemy rushed into their own formation, it was possible that Lu Zheng, who was heavily protected, would be accidentally injured." Lu Zheng's brows showed some fatigue. He said, "Today's battle situation is not optimistic. The enemy's combat power is extremely strong, while our army—" He wanted to say something but stopped. In terms of the number of troops in the three armies, Shui undoubtedly had a great advantage. They were almost twice as many as the enemy. But in terms of overall combat quality, the elites under Jiang Pingji's command obeyed orders strictly. Their ability to carry out battles was extremely strong, and the combat power they displayed was naturally tyrannical. Even without Jiang Pingji, who was a bug in the game, charging and killing at the front, they gradually suppressed Shui's arrogance. Lu Zheng had seen countless storms and waves, but he had never wanted to curse like he did today. Look at the enemy's combat quality. Look at his own people's ability to carry out their tasks. The troops under Jiang Pingji's command used their actions to tell Shui that numbers didn't mean everything. Their quality was inferior to the enemy's, and Shui had recruited so many ordinary young men in such a short period of time who were waving flags and shouting battle cries. They had forcefully lowered the overall quality of the troops. Over the past few days, Lu Zheng had tasted what it meant to be powerless. He almost couldn't suppress his negative emotions. In his mind, he had several formations to deal with the enemy. He cooperated with the chief commander to issue military orders, but the effect was far from what he had expected. It was as if his brain was active, and he tried to control his body to counterattack and defend against the enemy, but his limbs wouldn't listen to him. He was either paralyzed and stiff, or he was flailing about. He could only watch helplessly as the enemy's raised blade pierced into his body. Lu Zheng had returned so late that day, not only because he was injured, but more importantly, because Shui had made him stay behind and reprimanded him. Everyone knew what the crux of the matter was, but no one stood up for Lu Zheng. They didn't dare to say it. What did they say? That the overall combat power of the army wasn't strong because the quality of the troops that Shui had forcibly recruited was too weak. Not only did they not increase their combat power, but they were also holding them back. If they said that, it would be tantamount to questioning Shui's decision and ability. No one wanted to commit a crime when Shui was furious. Lu Zheng became the scapegoat. Of course, Shui still had a sense of propriety. Although he said it was a reprimand, he actually didn't say anything harsh. After all, his trusted aide and right-hand man, Hua Yuan, wasn't here. He still needed to rely on Lu Zheng now. He couldn't completely offend him and disappoint him. Kong Xintong was silent. She only brought the warm food to Lu Zheng, hoping that he would eat a little. "I'm afraid that in this battle, I'll try my best to help you settle down." Jiang Pingji still didn't participate in the battle, but the army led by Fu Wang was assisted by a few famous strategists. Lu Zheng was surrounded by useless teammates. He had the heart but not the strength. Before the situation worsened, he planned to first find a way out for Kong Xintong and ensure her safety. "I'm not going anywhere." Kong Xintong refused resolutely. Lu Zheng ate in silence, neither agreeing nor disagreeing. Without waiting for Lu Zheng to come up with a plan, bad news arrived 2 days later. It shocked the entire army and made them anxious and uneasy. 200,000 dawn of rations had been stolen. And Cui was so angry that his entire body trembled. He killed the general who was responsible for escorting the rations. In his heart, he even cursed 18 generations of Jiang Pingji's ancestors. Lu Zheng frowned slightly. Jiang Pingji, who had been in seclusion for 2 months, had appeared. She seized 200,000 dawn of rations in one move. Lu Zheng sighed and said, "It's really her style. It was fine if she didn't move, but once she did, she would kill." In response, Jiang Pingji expressed her apology. Chapter 1662. Your Highness. Your Highness, please spare me. I'm really wronged. Lu Zheng had received the news that the rations had been robbed and hurried over, just in time to see 2 soldiers dragging the tied-up general out to be dealt with according to military law. The general knew he was going to die, but he refused to give up hope of survival. Seeing Lu Zheng's figure from the corner of his eye, he hurriedly straightened his neck and shouted, "Military counselor! Military counselor! I'm wronged. I've been diligent in supervising the rations. I've never betrayed my lord." Hearing him shout, Lu Zheng's feet paused, his wooden clogs making a muffled sound on the gravel. The general struggled and said, "It's not my fault that the rations were leaked. Military counselor, save me. I'm really wronged. The rations were fake. They were switched long ago. I'm wronged. Military counselor, save me." Lu Zheng regained his composure after just one breath. He lifted the curtain of the main tent and bent over to enter. He was late. The tent was already filled with people, but many of them had grave expressions and didn't even notice his arrival. And Cui had just ordered the execution of the general, and was still angry. Seeing that Lu Zheng was late, he was even more displeased. He hadn't expected Lu Zheng's tent to be set up so far away from the commander's tent. Even if Lu Zheng had jogged all the way here, he wouldn't have arrived so quickly. Of course, as a qualified scumbag, and Cui wouldn't find fault with himself. Ordering people he didn't like to come and go at his beck and call was the typical behavior of a scumbag. When there was nothing to do, he ignored Lu Zheng. When there was something to do, he spoke intimately. He suppressed his displeasure and asked for a solution in a low voice. His eyes seemed to flow with pure trust. Lu Zheng had long been used to Cui's behavior. While sighing that his lord was a drama queen and every inch of her was an actor, he bowed in shame and said, "I heard about the rations being robbed and rushed here. I didn't have time to understand the details." Cui choked, feeling even more suffocated. Seeing that Cui had nothing to say, Lu Zheng turned his head to ask the others what had happened. Cui silently swallowed the roiling scolding in his throat. He suppressed his irritation and waited for Lu Zheng to understand what had happened. 200,000 dawn of rations was not a small number, and it was also related to the army's consumption for a while. So the troops guarding the rations naturally did not dare to slack off. Unfortunately, no matter how hard they tried, they still failed to defend against the enemy. When the grain transport army was about to arrive, they were robbed by the enemy. Everyone thought that it was Jiang Pingji's masterpiece with her execution ability. Jiang Pingji's status rose along with the tide. The things she had done were studied under a magnifying glass and analyzed over and over again. As her enemies, Cui and the others naturally knew how many things this fiend had done that made people tremble in fear just by hearing her name. After the analysis, they unanimously threw the blame to her. Little did they know that after Jiang Pingji turned over a new leaf, she did not roam the front lines anymore, let alone bring people to rob rations. It was true that the people under her command had robbed the rations, but she was not the one who had benefited from the rations. Lu Zheng was keenly aware that something was wrong. He furrowed his brows and asked the people around him. After a while he said to Cui, My lord, there are still doubtful points in this matter. I sincerely ask my lord to retract your order and spare General Chai's life for now. And Cui almost fainted from anger. He could not suppress his temper and reprimanded Lu Zheng for having ulterior motives in front of everyone. General Chai, whom Lu Zheng had accused of collaborating with the enemy and betraying his lord, should be killed if not this kind of person? Kill Lu Zheng. And Cui did not expect Lu Zheng to plead for mercy on General Chai's behalf. He was even more furious. I sincerely ask my lord to listen to me. There are many doubtful points in this matter. My lord should treat it with caution. Lu Zheng looked like he was going by the book. His tone was indifferent. The matter of the rations is a secret of our army. How did the enemy know so much about it and catch General Chai off guard? And Cui laughed coldly and asked in return. This person even has a letter of collaboration with the enemy and betrayal of his lord. How do you think Lu Shi knows so much about it? The enemy could tell at a glance that this had been planned for a long time. There must have been an insider who leaked information to them. Who else could it be other than General Chai, who had irrefutable evidence? He really did not know what was wrong with such a stupid question. Lu Zheng said. In that case, after the rations were stolen, why didn't he take the opportunity to be captured by Lu Shi and escape from his predicament? Instead, he led an army to break out of the encirclement and pass the news to my lord, causing him to be killed in the end. Also, General Chai said that the rations were fake. What's going on? And Cui said angrily, it's just a traitor's way of survival and framing others. Lu Zheng did not think so. When the enemy had launched a sneak attack, General Chai had tried his best to protect the rations. However, the enemy had the advantage of time, place, and people. They had suddenly attacked and caught everyone off guard. With a ferocious move, the soldiers guarding the rations had been beaten senseless. General Chai had tried his best to delay the enemy, but to no avail. In the end, he had no choice but to burn all the rations. They could not use them, and the rations could not fall into the enemy's hands. In the end, the rations on the top were normal, but the rations on the bottom were disguised. They did not contain rations at all. When General Chai discovered this, he was completely stunned. This was far more terrifying than an enemy's sneak attack. And Cui wanted to kill him, so he revealed this matter. In the end, no one believed him. Framing others? Framing who? Lu Zheng said in a low voice. No matter how protective the Lord is, he should not be biased at a time like this. The person in charge of the rations was Hua Yuan. If the rations Hua Yuan had prepared were real, then General Chai was the liar. On the other hand, this problematic batch of rations had been prepared by Hua Yuan. Perhaps the one who leaked the details of the rations and attracted the enemy's precise attack was Hua Yuan. After some maneuvering, this batch of 200,000 don of rations was rightfully taken by Hua Yuan. Of course, and Cui was not the only one who did not believe this. The others did not believe it either. What would Hua Yuan gain by doing this? They did not know, but Lu Zheng did. That madman's inner core was Lu Shi. What did he gain by seizing the rations and heartlessly betraying his teammates? This monster was preparing to ascend to the heavens. Of course, even if Lu Zheng told the others that Hua Yuan's essence had been divided into Lu Shi, no one would believe him. Instead, they would think that he was using clumsy and underhanded methods to suppress Hua Yuan. Lu Zheng could not be bothered with this thankless task. Do whatever you want. He had lost all hope in his teammates. And Cui was so angry that he was about to ascend to the heavens. What did Lu Zheng mean by this? Was he reprimanding him for being biased in front of everyone? They did not know that Jiang Pingji was also very angry. The anger levels of the two feudal lords had reached a delicate balance. Jiang Pingji looked at the rations that Li Yin had snatched back, and her face darkened. Humph, Lu Xiaoyin has eaten a lot of pig's brains over the years. His brain is quite nourished. He even schemed against me. She gritted her teeth so hard that they made a ringing sound. The rations that she had spent so much effort to steal were actually fake. Her efforts had become a joke. After thinking about it, she locked her target on Lu Zheng. After all, This kind of underhanded plotting was indeed like him. No matter how big her brain was, she could not have guessed that in Chui's official, Hua Yuan's essence, had created a Lu Shi and was secretly preparing to cause trouble. The real mastermind, Hua Yuan, stared coldly at the small porcelain bottle in his hand and smiled. What is this? The Xichang Emperor's concubine asked anxiously. Hua Yuan said, poison. The Xichang Emperor's concubine stuck out her belly and trembled. She asked fearfully, to whom? Hua Yuan laughed. Guess. The Emperor's concubine was speechless. Chapter 1663. This poison is for Chui? The Xichang Emperor's concubine knew that Hua Yuan was ambitious, but she didn't expect him to be so decisive. He actually wanted to poison Chui. No matter how bad Chui was, his trust in Hua Yuan and importance to him was unquestionable. He even valued Hua Yuan and neglected Lu Zheng. Now Hua Yuan wanted Hua Yuan dead for some unknown reason. The Xichang Emperor's concubine shuddered at the thought of it. On second thought, Hua Yuan had forced her to do something even more disgusting. It didn't seem out of line for this person to have the ambition to kill her lord. Hua Yuan glanced at the Xichang Emperor's concubine, his thin lips curving into a smile. The golden light shone on his face, forming a faint halo. He looked like a god. Xichang's emperor concubine felt even more complicated when she saw this. Heaven had given Hua Yuan an outstanding appearance, an elegant demeanor, and even extraordinary intelligence. Yet such a beautiful appearance hid such filth and filth. One could not help but sigh. As the Xichang Emperor's concubine's thoughts ran wild, she heard Hua Yuan's calm reply. Why would the side lady think that I want to poison my lord to death? My lord has treated me well. A drop of water should be repaid with a spring. The Xichang Emperor's concubine choked. Her face contorted. A drop of water should be repaid with a spring? The spring, he mentioned, was secretly transplanting a large patch of green grassland on his lord's head? Not only did he transplant the grassland, but he also manipulated it in secret. He relied on Chui's trust to tamper with the rations. She wasn't wrong. The rations that Li Yin had gone through so much trouble to rob had been intentionally given away by Hua Yuan. Only 10% of the rations were real. The other 90% were fake. Hua Yuan had secretly leaked information to lure the enemy over to rob the rations. Jiang Pingji had taken the bait and sent people to rob the rations. The 200,000 don of provisions were easily taken away by the enemy. Through this method, Hua Yuan managed to keep this batch of rations for himself in a justifiable manner. The Xichang Emperor's concubine and the prince felt uneasy. Hua Yuan's methods were so vicious and swift. Could they really gain even the slightest bit of advantage from him? The Empress concubine did her best to suppress the fear, worry and fear in her heart, and forced out an extremely stiff smile. Hua Yuan had secretly embezzled a huge amount of rations, and didn't even care about the lives and deaths of the frontline soldiers. Even a 3-year-old child wouldn't believe that he didn't have the intention to rebel. How could I not believe Sir's words? I misunderstood you just now. Although Emperor concubine Xichang said that, no one knew what she was thinking. I'm stupid. I hope you can give me some pointers so that I can understand. You don't know, but the Lord has been looking forward to the child in your womb for a long time. Hua Yuan stretched out his hand, and used the back of his finger to caress Xichang's imperial concubine's protruding belly. The imperial concubine was so frightened by his actions that her entire body stiffened. She did not dare to move. Cold sweat broke out on her forehead, and her slender body trembled slightly. It was as if Hua Yuan was not using his finger, but a sword to threaten her. Finally, when she realized that Hua Yuan hadn't harmed her, she heaved a long sigh of relief. She faintly felt as if she had escaped from death. But Sir knows this child isn't. Hua Yuan retracted his hand and took out a handkerchief from his sleeve to wipe his fingers. His movements were reserved and elegant, as if there was really something dirty on it. The Lord doesn't know, does he? He said indifferently. He doesn't know. The child you bear is his flesh and blood. Emperor Concubine shut her mouth, because she realized that Hua Yuan's eyes were flashing with murderous intent. If she said one more thing that she didn't dare to say, she didn't doubt that the poison in Hua Yuan's hands would enter her mouth. As if he was murmuring carelessly, Hua Yuan said, "If only this child was a son, the Lord would have a successor." Emperor Concubine forced a smile. Even if it's a son, he's just a bastard son. Lang Jun still has a legitimate young master. Because Chui's body was damaged, he could no longer impregnate women. In order to appease the officials who followed him, he adopted a son from a branch family. After many years, this young master had long been recognized by the officials. Everyone treated him as Chui's successor. Even if Emperor Concubine Shichang gave birth to Chui's biological son, he would only be a bastard son. He wouldn't be able to compete with the adopted son and nominal son of the legitimate wife. When her child grew up, who knew if Chui would still be alive? After all, there was a lunatic like Hua Yuan on the inside and Jiang Pingji on the outside. And Chui was sandwiched between them. No matter how you looked at it, he seemed like a short-lived creature. Even if Jiang Pingji didn't kill Chui, the young master would have grown up after many years. How could a young child be able to compete with him? Unless Emperor Concubine Shichang's mind spun. An extremely daring idea suddenly popped into her mind. Could it be? Her eyes widened and she took half a step back in fright. If the poison in Hua Yuan's hands wasn't prepared for Chui, then it was prepared for the young master. If the young master died, Chui would stay at the front lines and be controlled by Hua Yuan. Wouldn't his life and death be at Hua Yuan's disposal? As long as the two of them died, the child in her womb could only be used as a bargaining chip for Hua Yuan to seize power. As expected, Hua Yuan said, "Young master." Sighed Madam, "The Lord values the child in your womb more. He has long had the intention to abolish Li." Abolish Li? Yes, this is indeed the Lord's intention. The young master is a stumbling block for the child in the Side Madam's womb. A stumbling block naturally had to be kicked out. Emperor Concubine Shichang felt a chill in her heart. She didn't doubt Chui's ruthlessness. His intention to abolish Li was probably true, but whether it was Chui's idea or Hua Yuan's own decision to poison the young master was debatable. Chui was shameless, but he wasn't brainless. He favored his biological son, but before his biological son grew up, he wouldn't kick out his backup stepson early. An unborn child. No one knew how talented he was and whether he could grow up safely. In summary, this was most likely Hua Yuan's own intention. How can a woman like me understand these things? Everything will be decided by the master. Hua Yuan laughed. That won't do. I'll need a little help from the side, madam. Emperor Concubine Shichang's eyelids twitched violently. What kind of help? Hua Yuan leaned forward and whispered a few words into her ear. Emperor Concubine's body trembled slightly. Her eyes were filled with shock and fear. "Yes, sir. This matter." Her lips trembled and she wanted to refuse, but when she saw Hua Yuan's half-smiling eyes and the murderous intent deep in them, she had no choice but to give in. Everything will be arranged by the master." Emperor Concubine held her stomach with one hand and lowered her head. Hatred and indignation that could topple mountains and overturn seas rose in her heart. It was too unbearable and humiliating to be at someone's mercy. A conspiracy quietly took shape. 2 days later, a spring rain came. The mountain mist was thick and light, and the air was filled with the fragrance of soil and spring rain. The faint sound of horse hooves approached from afar. Chapter 1664. It's a pity that you didn't come hunting today. The weather had been good these days, so the youth had asked Hua Yuan out to hunt with him. However, Hua Yuan had been troubled by the looting of rations, and could only decline the youth's invitation. The youth was disappointed, but he also understood that business was more important. He didn't dare to act recklessly. Ever since Chui's side wife had gotten pregnant, The youth could clearly feel that his father treated him differently. For example, during this war, as the heir who was about to reach adulthood, he had been left behind. It was said to be for protection, but honestly, did he need such protection in troubled times? A few years ago, the youth had gone to Dongqing with his master, Hua Yuan, to seek an alliance. At that time, there was no mention of protection. Why did Chui suddenly say protection, when he was about to reach adulthood? On the surface it was protection, but in reality, it was weakening the relationship between the youth and Chui's subjects. The youth wasn't stupid. He naturally realized it. However, he couldn't tell anyone about it. He could only suppress it in his heart. As an idler, and also to show his father how harmless he was, he had been addicted to hunting and pleasure. His master, Hua Yuan, had even lectured him seriously. Don't be addicted to pleasure and neglect your studies and government affairs. The youth could only smile bitterly. He didn't dare look up at Hua Yuan's disappointed eyes. He hadn't grown his wings yet, and could only rely on Chui. Even a sneeze from Chui made his heart jump and his thoughts run wild. The only fortunate thing was that his master, Hua Yuan, was the only person who had maintained a normal attitude toward him after the incident. Because they were rare, they were precious. The youth saw how Hua Yuan treated him, so he naturally trusted and respected him even more. He looked at the prey hanging from the horse's back, and seemed to think of something. The corners of his lips curled involuntarily, and his eyes curved into two crescent moons. His clear eyes were filled with a smile. He was very good-looking. Even though he still looked a little young, his bearing had already been developed. Anyone who saw such an outstanding youth in the wilderness would probably think that they had seen a beautiful spirit. I'm lucky today. This wasn't a good season for hunting. The prey had just survived winter and were skinny, not as plump as they were in autumn. However, the prey today were all good. Their fur was smooth and beautiful. The youth planned to pick the best and give it to Hua Yuan. The servant who served the youth cursed his bad luck. He mumbled, "How is it good luck? We've been completely drenched." The youth looked up at the rainwater dripping down from the eaves, brushing the moss green. Although the weather was not beautiful at this time, it did not affect the youth's bright mood. He said with a smile, "It's raining and we've already come across a wooden hut. Isn't that good?" When hunters went hunting in the mountains, those who were lucky could go and return on the same day. Those who were unlucky had to wait patiently in the mountains for a few days. For the sake of convenience, they would build this kind of temporary shelter, and passers-by could also rest here. The young man was in a good mood, and did not feel that the rain was inappropriate. The attendant untied the wineskin from the back of the horse, and handed it to the youth with both hands. "Young master, drink some wine to warm up your body, lest you catch a cold." The rain came suddenly. Even though everyone found shelter as fast as they could, they were still wet. Their clothes and hair were wet. The young man was of high status. If he fell sick because his attendants did not take good care of him, the attendants accompanying him would be in trouble. The attendant saw the young man take the wineskin and gulp it down. Only then did he feel relieved and turn around to fetch a clean set of clothes. Although the wooden hut was small, it had all the essentials. There was also a lot of dry firewood in the house, just enough to make a fire and boil water for the young man to bathe. The young man waved his hand and said, "Put the clothes aside. I'll change later. I don't want to move now." "Yes." The attendant put the clothes where the young man could reach out his hand, and respectfully stepped back to guard nearby. He did not know whether it was because his alcohol tolerance was too poor, or because the wine today was especially fragrant, but the young man finished the wineskin in a few mouthfuls. His white jade-like cheeks were slightly tipsy, and the drunkenness rushed to his head. Not long after, his white jade-like cheeks were covered with a thin layer of red, and his whole body exuded the unique youthful spirit of a young man. He did not care at first, but soon noticed something strange. A familiar yet strange hot wave spread from inside to outside, making his skin hot and red. He could not help but raise his hand to loosen his clothes to cool down. This feeling, the young man was a little angry. "What's with this wine?" The attendant heard the commotion and rushed over. Hearing the young man's question, he was shocked. "Young master, wasn't this wine given by Master Huayuan?" The young man suddenly remembered something, and his expression became slightly unnatural. It turned out that this wine was found by the young man's concubine from somewhere, and given to the young man. The young man knew that it was rare wine, so he gave it to Huayuan. Huayuan had been busy with the military rations recently, and had not rested for several days. He was not in the mood to taste the wine, so he asked the young man to pack most of the wine back. In other words, this problematic wine should have been done by the young man's concubine. Thinking of this, the young man's cheeks burned like a burning cloud. He was ashamed, angry, and hateful. The women in the inner residence would really do anything to be favored. Fortunately, the teacher did not drink it. If he did, he might make a fool of himself. The young man's face turned pale, then green, then purple, and finally black. The attendant was a very discerning person. He did not know what had happened, but it did not prevent him from taking the opportunity to flatter the young man. He said flatteringly, "I see that the young master looks tired. Why don't you go in and rest?" The young man felt uncomfortable, but he nodded in agreement. Just as he was about to get up, his body suddenly froze on the spot. He did not know whether he should get up or not. It was very awkward. He had been dreaming since he was 13. 2 years ago, his father and Chui had prepared 2 intelligent and beautiful concubines for him to learn about human relationships. With these experiences, he naturally knew what the changes in his body meant. He immediately became even more embarrassed. He unnaturally tightened his legs. However, he was dressed more professionally today, so the reaction under his abdomen was slightly more obvious. The attendant's sharp eyes saw the small tent under his abdomen and understood. The young man was extremely embarrassed. He ran into the farmhouse as if he was escaping and slammed the door shut. This kind of farmhouse was a place for hunters to rest. The environment was simple, but it could shelter them from the wind and rain. There were guards outside, so ordinary hunters could not enter. The young man glanced at his abdomen, and his face became even more ashen. The attendant was a clever person. He asked in a low voice, "Young master, do you want to call for someone?" "We'll see. There's no need for now," the young man replied in a hoarse voice. Even his breath was hot. The accompanying attendants were all men in their teens or 20s. There were no women. Chapter 1665. Of course, this was not an absolute rule. It was just an unspoken rule. The young man had lived in such an environment since he was a child, so he naturally understood the hints of the servants. He asked someone to prepare cold water for him, intending to soak in it to suppress the rising desire in his body. However, a basin of cold water was not enough. He could not calm down no matter how he tossed and turned. Instead, he was so hot that his whole body was restless. The young man's body was the most sensitive. The tide of passion came violently and violently. The more he endured, the more pain he felt. This was not the way to go on. The young man's whole body was hot, and his consciousness was a little blurred. He seemed to vaguely hear the creaking sound of the wooden door being opened. "Who is it?" the young man shouted in a daze. The person's footsteps were light. As the person approached, a delicate fragrance that almost made him lose his mind surrounded him. The young man opened his eyes to look, but a soft and fragrant hand covered his eyes, making him see darkness. "Langjun." Faintly, the person's sweet voice sounded in his ears. His sensitive earlobe was sucked by the other person's hot and wet mouth. The young man could not bear it. He raised his hand and pushed the person away, pressing her to the ground. He looked closer and saw that the other person was wearing a thin veil. Her delicate outline was hidden behind the veil, faintly discernible. Only her eyes were clear and moving. The other person seemed to be frightened by his actions. She opened her mouth slightly and let out a short scream. It was as if someone was using a soft feather to tickle the young man's heart, making him lose his mind. It was drizzling outside, but the passion in the room was intense. Not long after, there was a movement that made people blush. The young man, who was occupied by his instincts, did not notice that the person's lower abdomen was protruding, and she began to struggle and call for help. When the drizzle outside stopped, the passion in the room also came to an end. The sunset outside added a bit of a ghost. The young man woke up from his sleep and got up in a daze. He keenly noticed that something was wrong. There was another person's breathing next to him. He turned his head and saw a woman with a protruding lower abdomen and tearful cheeks lying next to him. At first glance, this person's profile was slightly familiar. The young man's memories before he fell asleep quickly came back, and the memory of the passion also flashed in front of his eyes. The young man was shocked and shivered. He recalled the appearance of the woman before her hair was scattered. It was clearly a married woman. Then he looked at her lower abdomen. The youth's face was like an overturned palette with all kinds of colors. At this time, the woman moaned and opened her eyes. When she saw the youth's appearance, she screamed and sat up. She covered her stomach with one hand and grabbed the scattered clothes to cover her body with the other. Because of this, the young man also saw the woman's appearance clearly, and it was as if he had been struck by lightning. Wasn't this person his adoptive father and Chui's side wife, the empress concubine from Xichang, his adoptive mother? Unfilial son. How could you do such a despicable thing? Are you worthy of your father? Without waiting for the youth to come back to his senses, Princess Concubine of Xichang cried and slapped him. At that moment, Princess Concubine Xichang's maidservant barged in. She was scared out of her wits by the situation. Anyone with a discerning eye would know what had happened to the two people in the room. One was in Chui's concubine, and she was pregnant. The other was in Chui's adopted son, currently the rightful heir. These two were mother and son in name, but now they were actually together? Princess Concubine Xichang was in so much pain that she wanted to die. Her hair was messy, and her exposed skin was bruised. It was obvious that she had been forced by her stepson. Because of the maidservant, the youth did not even have the chance to make up for it. There was only one thought in his mind. It's over. My stomach. Princess Concubine clutched her stomach, her face pale. Both the maidservant and the youth were scared out of their wits. The maidservant hurriedly wanted to find someone to take a look at Princess Concubine and protect the child in her womb. Nothing could happen to her. The scene was in chaos. The youth servants had also been attracted by the maidservant's movements. Looking at the chaotic scene, the youth realized that he had missed a great opportunity to salvage the situation. If people knew that he had sex with his father's concubine, and that he had clearly forced himself on her while drunk, he would definitely be finished. Even if he was innocent. At that moment, the youth had already realized that this was a plot against him. He had fallen into someone's trap. Unfortunately, there were witnesses and material evidence. Even if he had mouths all over his body, he could not clear his name at that moment. If the youth had half the decisiveness and viciousness of the mentally ill Hua Yuan, he could have killed Princess Concubine Xichang and her maidservants. Then he could come up with an excuse. As long as there was no evidence, no one would know what he had done to Princess Concubine Xichang. Although the servants knew, they were all the youth's people, so it was easy to clean them up. However, the youth was not Hua Yuan. He did not have the decisiveness to grasp this last opportunity. The price was that this matter would reach his master, Hua Yuan. If Hua Yuan knew, that meant that his adoptive father, and Chui, would know sooner or later. Sir, this student is really innocent. The youth could not defend himself. He could only hope that Hua Yuan would believe him. Chapter 1666. Because of Hua Yuan's refusal, the youth could only leave anxiously. Before he left, he even looked back 3 times. Hua Yuan watched him leave, but said nothing. His expression was solemn. The youth could only give up for now. Sir, what should we do now? Xicheng's empress concubine thought that Hua Yuan would poison the youth to death quickly. She had never expected that he would do nothing even after several days. As long as the youth did not die, Xicheng's empress concubine would live in fear. She was afraid that Hua Yuan would abandon her and become a useless pawn. She had followed Hua Yuan's instructions and walked down a path of no return. She schemed that the youth had an affair with her. If the youth and Enchui did not die, she would be the one to die when the child in her womb was born. With Enchui's temperament, how could he tolerate his concubine being tainted by an adopted son? If Enchui found out that the child in her womb was not his, Xicheng's empress concubine would probably wish for death. She was like a drowning person, clutching tightly to the straw in her hands before she died. Xicheng's empress concubine held her obvious belly with one hand and carefully leaned against the table, afraid that something would happen to the child. I have done everything according to Sir's instructions. There is no turning back. If Sir abandons me now, I really do not know what to do. Her face was filled with tenderness. One could not help but reach out to smooth her frowning brows. Of course, this person did not include Hua Yuan. This lunatic had a heart of stone. I know, Hua Yuan said coldly. He had no intention of giving a precise reply. Sir, I am worried that a long delay will bring trouble. Although the young master is young, he is still a child personally raised by Sir and Enchui. If he is not eliminated quickly, he will be a disaster. Xicheng's empress concubine did not forget to flatter Hua Yuan. Also, my pregnancy has been affected because of that matter. If he takes this opportunity to harm me, I will be so worried that I will not be able to sleep at night. She had only dared to plot against the youth according to Hua Yuan's instructions, because the appearance of the fetus was already stable. In order to pretend to be more realistic, some of the struggling movements were inevitably more violent. The youth had also lost his rationality under the influence of the drug, and his movements were rough. That young and strong body made her suffer greatly, and even her stomach began to feel uncomfortable. Only then did she panic. Under Hua Yuan's threat, she had already thrown caution to the wind. However, if the youth didn't die, she would never be at ease. She could only urge Hua Yuan to take action again and again. How could Hua Yuan not know what she was thinking? Hua Yuan's lips curled into a cold smile. There's no rush. It's almost there. Emperor concubine Xicheng pressed. What do you mean by not in a hurry? How soon is it? As long as he lives, I will live in fear. If she could, she would love nothing more than for Hua Yuan to pinch the young man's chin and pour poison into him. That way, all troubles would end once and for all, and there would be no future troubles. Hua Yuan snorted and did not answer. Xicheng's princess concubine saw his unhappy expression and immediately came to her senses. She regretted being too impulsive. I'm just worried. I'm not doubting you, she explained dryly, trying to salvage some of the situation so that Hua Yuan wouldn't be in a bad mood and pour all his dirty tricks on her. There's no need to worry. Hua Yuan's expression softened slightly as he said, the time is ripe. This answer put Xicheng's princess concubine's worried heart back to its original place. She and Hua Yuan had the same interests. At present, they were 2 grasshoppers tied to the same rope. If anything happened to her, Hua Yuan would not be able to escape. Reality proved that her worries were unfounded. Hua Yuan, that maniac, would definitely be able to scheme against anyone. The young man was still too young. In terms of skill and scheming, how could he compare to the scheming and maniac Hua Yuan? Xicheng's princess concubine thought that Hua Yuan had not taken action, but that was not the case. Hua Yuan had taken action. However, he did not harm the young man's body, but his mind. He suppressed his will and destroyed his psychological defenses, forcing the young man to lose all will to live in his panic. Finally, he consumed the poison that Hua Yuan had gotten someone to deliver to the young man. On this day the night was dark. The moon was hidden behind the dark clouds, and the stars were dim. Hua Yuan stood under the window in a daze with his clothes draped over his shoulders. He was not in the mood to sleep. There was a letter on the table beside him. This letter had been delivered by the young man's attendant several hours ago. Because it was not personally delivered to Hua Yuan only saw it after he was done with all his work. The contents of the letter were not very useful. It was just the last cry of a desperate and dying young beast. When all was silent, a flurry of hurried footsteps could be heard from afar. When the other person ran closer, Hua Yuan could still hear the other person's heavy breathing. He looked at the approaching person with an indifferent expression, his brows slightly furrowed. Hua Yuan asked unhappily, "What's the matter?" The servants in the residence were all well-mannered. They served Hua Yuan carefully and would not run loudly under normal circumstances. However, at this moment, they did not care about the rules. One could imagine how sensational the news brought by the servant was. "Master, master, something bad has happened." The servant caught his breath and said breathlessly, "The young master is dead." Dead. Yes, the news just came. The young master committed suicide by ingesting poison. He's already gone. The servant trembled as he finished speaking. His eyes stared unblinkingly at Hua Yuan. His muscles tensed as he moved forward to catch the grieving Hua Yuan. Unexpectedly, Hua Yuan's reaction was beyond the servant's expectations. He thought that based on the deep relationship between Hua Yuan and the young master, even if he did not faint from grief, he would be horrified upon hearing this. However, Hua Yuan's expression did not change at all. It was as if the one who died was not his student, but an insignificant child beggar. He did not even ask how he died. It was as if Hua Yuan had already expected this, and had been waiting for this news to come. The servant was frightened by his own guess. He hurriedly lowered his head, afraid that Hua Yuan would see an expression that he should not have. "I already know. You may leave and prepare the clothes." The young man's death was no different from an earthquake to others, but it was within Hua Yuan's expectations. His indifferent gaze turned to the letter on the table, and the corners of his lips curled up in silent mockery. Stupid. This was Hua Yuan's evaluation of the young man's death. If he was not stupid and weak, how could the young man not know who the real person was? Before he died, he even wrote to him. His words were sincere, and every sentence was filled with remorse. He said that he had let down Hua Yuan's many years of teaching. Now that he was gone, he asked him not to grieve for an incompetent and unfilial student. The victim's suicide note to the murderer was so sincere. It was really ridiculous. He's destined not to live. It's clean now that he's gone. Hua Yuan felt a little regretful. The young man was taught by Hua Yuan, but his ambition was not big enough. The old man's words were absolutely right. Wasn't Hua Yuan the B*TCH he was referring to? The room was in chaos, and people rushed over to stop the two of them. Some stopped the old official, and some stopped Hua Yuan. Regardless of whether the young man's death was honorable or not, the deceased was more important. His body had just cooled down, so they could not make a ruckus here and disturb the deceased. Moreover, it was really inappropriate for the two of them to fight in front of the corpse. "I told you to scram." Hua Yuan raised his hand and waved his sleeve, brushing away the people who tried to stop him. Before he could take half a step forward, he felt a sharp pain in the depths of his mind. The scenery in front of him blurred and turned scarlet. In Hua Yuan's eyes, the figures around him were all people made of blood without facial features. Their mouths opened and closed as they said something. One voice became two. Two became four became 8. Gradually, the voices from all directions became thousands, interfering with his hearing. Hua Yuan's feet felt weak as he stumbled and fell forward. Fortunately, someone was quick enough to pull him up, or he would have crashed to the ground. Everyone was shocked by this turn of events. Even the old official who wanted to take Xicheng's empress concubine's life was distracted. When they came over, they saw that Hua Yuan's face was abnormally pale. They thought that he was suppressing his grief, but they did not expect him to release his emotions. Everyone thought of the teacher-student relationship between Hua Yuan and the young man and felt very sad. They did not expect Hua Yuan to have such crazy looks. Stop arguing. All of you stop arguing. All of you scram. Scram. Hua Yuan pushed away the people who approached him and shouted at the top of his lungs. His eyes were bloodshot, and he looked deranged. Young master has passed away. My condolences, military advisor. The dead cannot be remembered. Scram. All of you scram. Hua Yuan held his head in pain with one hand and pointed at the crowd with the other, telling them to stop talking. His head was really about to explode. His head hurt like there was a hand stirring his brain and crushing his skull. He was in so much pain that he was on the verge of death. After an unknown amount of time, Hua Yuan finally regained some of his senses. He knelt on the ground. His usual elegant demeanor was completely gone. All that was left was a strange madness and a dejection that came from his soul. Everyone thought that he had lost his composure because he could not take the blow. They did not expect Hua Yuan's next move to almost make their eyes pop out of their sockets. With a swoosh, he unsheathed his sword. Someone was so frightened that he shouted, "Military advisor, you mustn't." Chapter 1668. Opportunities were fleeting. They could not be missed. Hua Yuan's main body took advantage of his student's death to temporarily regain consciousness. He had wanted to commit suicide and end all his troubles, but he did not expect to be stopped by the crowd. How could he fight against so many people alone? After a series of struggles, his sword was taken away, and his mouth was gagged when he tried to bite his tongue. All his energy was in vain, and he ended up in a sorry state. He was filled with grief and indignation. He finally understood what it meant to be begging for death, but unable to live. Hua Yuan only wanted to die. Why did everyone act as if he wanted their lives? Why were they fighting so hard? After a stalemate, Hua Yuan was exhausted. His arms and legs were weak and powerless, and he could only gasp for air through his mouth. Seeing that he did not have the energy to court death, the others secretly sighed in relief. Even though they did not like Hua Yuan, and Chui would lose an arm if Hua Yuan died. Their interests would be tied to Chui's. To put it simply, protecting Hua Yuan was protecting their own interests. Naturally, they had to try their best to stop him. You guys are unreasonable. Hua Yuan's head was spinning. Waves of dizziness and nausea washed over him. This feeling was too familiar. Before he lost consciousness, Hua Yuan felt a pair of murky red eyes open in the darkness. The owner of this pair of eyes was looking at him coldly. There was no sadness, no joy, no shock, no anger, but Hua Yuan felt as if he was being stared at by the nine hells. No, perhaps it was not a hallucination. The owner of this pair of eyes could really drag people into hell. When he went crazy, Hua Yuan's heart trembled. All the hair on his body stood up in protest. He knew that that person was about to wake up. The advisor has fainted. Someone shouted. Only then did the crowd realize that Hua Yuan's face was pale, and his eyes were closed as he leaned back. He looked more like a corpse than the one on the bed. The crowd pressed him down, called into Hua Yuan's ear, and sent for a doctor. After all this, they were all drenched in sweat. It was as if they had run several kilometers with 100-kilogram sandbag on their backs. Heaven did not disappoint those who worked hard. Their efforts were still useful. Before the doctor arrived, Hua Yuan slowly woke up and opened his eyes. Someone said, "Military advisor, The current situation is critical, and we still need you to put in effort to plan. How can you abandon the Lord for the young master? The old official who had wanted to kill Xicheng's princess concubine had also calmed down. He said a few words and did not continue fighting. They sincerely persuaded Hua Yuan to give up on the idea of dying, but the person in question had a look that said, "Are you all pigs? I'm fine." Hua Yuan propped himself up on his weak legs and noticed that there was some sort of sticky liquid on his neck. He raised his hand to wipe it off and brought it before his eyes to take a look. It was actually bright red blood. He curled the corners of his lips mockingly and said indifferently, "The young master has just passed away. Prepare the funeral rites and send someone to inform the Lord. The cause of young master's death is not honorable. To the public, we will say that he suddenly died of a serious illness." When everyone saw that Hua Yuan had regained his composure, they could not help but feel relieved. Even if Hua Yuan's expression was deathly still, it was still better than drawing his sword and seeking death at the slightest provocation. As long as he didn't want to kill himself and sacrifice himself for his master, everything was fine. "Yes. Yes, Your Majesty." Just like that, the curtains fell on the farce. A doctor hurried over to treat the wound on Hua Yuan's neck. Hua Yuan did not move at all, allowing the doctor to do as he pleased. He was like a lifeless porcelain doll. When the doctor saw this, he thought that Hua Yuan had failed to sacrifice himself for his master, and was disheartened. He sighed and said, "You must avoid eating for the next few days. Your wound must not come into contact with any filth to prevent bad luck from entering your body and causing your wound to swell and rot. I will prescribe some medicine for you. Take it regularly and you will get better." Hua Yuan asked him, "Is the wound deep?" The doctor replied, "It's not deep, but the location is dangerous." Hua Yuan remained silent when he heard that. However, the emotions that flashed in his eyes made the doctor's heart palpitate. "You may leave. I want to be alone and rest. I still have to arrange the young master's funeral rites later." Hua Yuan chased him away. The doctor's lips quivered, but he did not say anything to dissuade him. He could only leave quietly. The moment the doctor left, Hua Yuan flicked his sleeves and knocked everything in sight to the ground. His elegant and handsome face was filled with malevolence. "I'm not a lunatic, I'm not. I am me." He suppressed his roar in his throat. Even though his voice was not loud, it was extremely penetrating and infectious, causing the hair of those who heard it to stand on end. Unfortunately, he was the only one in the room. No one else could hear him. The chaotic night was dispersed by the morning sun. The news of the young master's sudden death from an acute illness spread everywhere, as if it had wings. This news naturally reached Chui, who was at the front lines. Chui received 2 letters. One was a normal funeral announcement, and the other was a secret letter that Hua Yuan had kept under wraps for a long time. This secret letter described in detail how the young master had bullied his pregnant concubine mother, causing her to have an unstable pregnancy and almost losing her child. Apart from that, Hua Yuan also added the truth of the young master's death. He had not died a sudden death. Instead, he had committed suicide out of fear after doing something wrong. The 2 letters arrived one after the other. When he read the first letter, Chui felt grief and indescribable joy at the same time. His adopted son had died, and the stumbling block that had been weighing on his heart was gone. No one could stop his biological son from ascending to the throne. When he read the second secret letter, Chui's anger shot through the roof. The veins on his forehead swelled up and down, as if there were green snakes coiling around his forehead. He was so angry that his hands were shaking, his face was ashen, and his chest rose and fell rapidly. He wanted nothing more than to dig out his stepson and whip his corpse. He had bullied and humiliated his concubine mother while he was away, causing her to have an unstable pregnancy and almost have a miscarriage. Chui did not know that he had actually raised an ingrate who could not be tamed. He had actually done such a shameless, Treacherous thing. Well done. These 3 words were almost squeezed out through his molars. When he thought about how his woman, a woman who was pregnant with his child, had been tainted by his stepson, an intense feeling of humiliation surged into his heart, causing his hatred to shoot to the heavens. Committing suicide out of fear of punishment? That was too easy for this brat. At the very least, he should be executed by 1,000 cuts. Despite his anger, Chui could not spread the word about what his stepson had done. Similarly, he could not reveal the truth of his death to the public. Not only could he not, but he also had to clean up the other party's mess and ensure his reputation after his death. If he did not do this, the outside world would inevitably speculate that his stepson's death had been incited by Chui, that he had harmed his stepson in order to clear the way for his biological son. This would inevitably leave behind a negative impression that Chui was vicious and merciless, that he would do anything to achieve his goals. More importantly, the world would also know that Chui had been cuckolded by his stepson. For a man, being cuckolded was the most unbearable humiliation. For the sake of his own reputation, Chui could not act on impulse. At most, he would use some small methods to vent his anger behind the scenes. Chapter 1669. After all, he was someone who had climbed to the position of a feudal lord. Chui had his flaws, but he also had his merits. He couldn't be killed with a single blow. Not to mention what the unfilial son had done that violated human ethics. The impact his death had on Chui was not something that could be summed up by being cuckolded. With his death, Chui had no heir. His only bloodline was still germinating in the belly of the Xichang princess. The officials didn't know whether the child was a boy or a girl, or how talented he was. Everything was unknown. They couldn't help but feel anxious. Chui had an heir. This was the only advantage he had over Jiang Pingji. Now that the heir was dead, and Chui was much older than Jiang Pingji, his remaining advantage was gone. Thinking of this, Chui felt pain and sorrow. He couldn't help but pull out the corpse of the Nanman tribe that he had exterminated. If the Nanman hadn't rebelled and overthrown Nanxing, he, Chui, was a man with both a son and a daughter. How could he have fallen to such a miserable state? When he thought of the scene of his children losing their lives in the Nanman tribe, he was so grief-stricken that he couldn't speak. Hatred grew wildly in his heart like weeds. Perhaps his luck had been too bad recently. Bad things happened to Chui one after another. First, 200,000 dawn of rations were plundered by Jiang Pingji. Then, his stepson bullied his stepmother and committed suicide to escape punishment. Following that, Hua Yuan almost killed himself for his master. This wasn't the end. Their enemies also increased their attacks in tacit understanding, causing Chui to be badly battered. The rations issue hadn't been completely resolved. The news of the rations shortage spread like wildfire. The morale of the soldiers at the grassroots level was greatly shaken. Chui was still a scumbag. He looked for Lu Zheng when he needed something. Little did he know that Lu Zheng only wanted to curse. Did he really think he was a fairy? Could he conjure rations out of thin air? If he could, he would be the first to conjure rations to drown Chui. Lu Zheng's anger burned fiercely, but anger couldn't change anything. The crisis before him was getting more and more intense. Therefore, Lu Zheng could only give Chui an ultimatum. He wanted Chui to urge Hua Yuan to replenish the rations as soon as possible. If he couldn't, everyone would starve to death together. How infuriating! Even a cup of cold water couldn't extinguish Lu Zheng's anger. Too many things had taken up Lu Zheng's energy recently, so he forgot that his schoolmate was a troublemaker. Jiang Pingji and Lu Zheng were both students from Lengyi Academy. They were alumni of the same school, so they were naturally in the same camp. With a little effort, Jiang Pingji could make the relationship between Chui and Lu Zheng, which was on the verge of collapse, take a turn for the worse, or even completely collapse. From what she had seen, Chui was not a broad-minded person. His position and opinions were different from Lu Zhang's, and the two of them often had conflicts. This could be seen from the fact that Chui had placed Hua Yuan in an important position over the past 2 years, while Lu Zheng had been given the cold shoulder. Chui had a lot of opinions about Lu Zheng. If Jiang Pingji added fuel to the fire and sowed discord between the two, she might even be able to use Chui to force Lu Zheng into a desperate situation. Lu Zheng was not someone who would sit and wait for death. If that really happened, he might even jump ship at the last minute. Hence, when Wei Ci saw his lord bending over the table and writing a letter to his classmate, Lu Zheng, his heart was filled with mixed feelings. Because Jiang Pingji did not hide her letter from Wei Ci, Wei Ci could see the lingering sentences in the letter. Almost every word recalled the time when he was studying at Langyi Academy. Jiang Pingji used simple but intimate words to exaggerate the friendship between them into 100%. Those who did not know the truth would wonder if Lu Zheng and Jiang Pingji had such a close relationship when they were young. Wei Ci recalled Chui's temperament and felt more and more sorry for Lu Zheng. How many lifetimes of bad luck did this man have to have a lord like Chui and an opponent like Jiang Pingji? Oh. Before he sympathized with Chui, Wei Ci also had to sympathize with himself in his previous life. He and Lu Zheng were in the same boat. Based on Xiaoyin's temperament, it's impossible for him to accept my lord's invitation. Wei Ci could not help but remind him. Lu Zheng was a petty and vengeful fellow. She had offended him greatly, so it would not be easy to recruit him in the future. Chui's temperament is very different from Lu Zheng's. The two of them are not on the same path. Even if my lord did not interfere, sooner or later, there would be discord between them. Why did my lord go through all this trouble? Not all lords in this world are as broad-minded and perceptive as I am. Jiang Pingji said narcissistically. Chui has never been a gentleman. He doesn't walk the same path as Xiaoyin. I wanted to use Chui to force Xiaoyin into a corner and force him to leave Chui sooner. Time has dragged on for too long. I don't have the time to waste with Chui, this clown. Coincidentally, there was a problem on Chui's side. It was the perfect time to make them fall apart in one go. Don't you think that Xiaoyin is too much of an eyesore? Wei Ci was speechless. If Lu Zheng heard Jiang Pingji's words, he would definitely cry, wouldn't he? Jiang Pingji continued. You and I both know Xiaoyin's ability. Letting him stay by Chui's side won't do us any good. Wei Ci coughed softly and said, although it's the truth, my lord's way of expressing it is still unacceptable. To be honest, Wei Ci had been rather jealous of Lu Zheng for a period of time. Lu Zheng could approach her without any ill feelings and talk to her freely, but Wei Ci could only stand outside the safety line and watch. He could only experience all kinds of bitterness on his own. No one could confide in him. Jiang Pingji didn't know what Wei Ci was thinking about. She only smiled and said, there's only Zi Xiao by my side. Xiaoyin isn't here. Can you still repeat what he said? Even if he knows what I said, he can't have any opinions. In the future, I will be his master and he will be my subject. Wei Ci said, this is a good ending. In the previous life, Lu Zheng's ending was too tragic. If this life was perfect, it could make up for the regrets of the previous life. If Lu Zheng knew about the conversation between the adulterous couple, he would most likely be so angry that he would jump up in rage. Was there anyone more shameless than them in this world? As it turned out, there wasn't. Jiang Pingji was a textbook scoundrel. No one could compare to her. When Lu Zheng saw the letter that Jiang Pingji had written for him appear in Chui's hands, there was only one thought in his mind. That bastard was up to mischief again. It wasn't that Jiang Pingji hadn't written letters to Lu Zheng before. Not only did she write them herself, but she also sent Fang Ji to persuade him. Unfortunately, Lu Zheng's beliefs were firm and unwavering. This time, Jiang Pingji gave him a strong dose of medicine. The contents of the letter were as ambiguous as one could imagine. More importantly, this letter appeared when Chui had just suffered a defeat. Chui's expression was as solemn as ink. Does Xiaoyin have any explanation? Faced with Chui's questioning, Lu Zheng was furious. It's just a clumsy method of sowing discord. It's not like it hasn't happened in the past. Is my lord going to doubt my loyalty based on this alone? Lu Zheng couldn't be bothered to defend himself. Every time An Chui doubted him, his good impression of An Chui wore away. Chapter 1670. In the face of An Chui's calm questioning, Lu Zheng's reaction seemed to have a deeper meaning. Why didn't he confess to An Chui that Fang Ji had come to lobby him? Did An Chui really not know? When Fang Ji had come, Lu Zheng had still been thrown to the side by An Chui. Was he crazy or stupid? Why did he confess? Lu Zheng looked at his lord calmly. He had put in years of effort and energy for this man, trying his best to maintain this relationship between the lord and his subject. In the end, all he got in return was vigilance, suspicion, and suppression. Lu Zheng was already in this state. How could he prove his loyalty? Did he really have to imitate his predecessors and stab a dagger into his heart, dig it out, and let An Chui take a look? How ridiculous! An Chui attracted most of the attention. The real culprit, Jiang Pingji, was not so annoying. Fang Ji was my classmate and friend when I was young. He had a personal relationship with Lu Shi. He didn't serve Lu Shi. At most, it was a personal relationship. I didn't say anything about Fang Ji, because I didn't want my lord to misunderstand and hurt Fang Ji. Up to this point, Lu Zheng was still calm and composed. He wasn't embarrassed or flustered at all after being exposed. He was even calm and composed enough to speak frankly with assurance and composure in front of An Chui. He enunciated each and every word to excuse himself. Moreover, I've never intentionally concealed the matter regarding Fang Ji. My lord doesn't trust me, but can you not trust Hua Yuan? He knows about Fang Ji, but he didn't tell you. Why doesn't my lord think about it? Lu Zheng couldn't help but mock himself when he said this. He and Hua Yuan didn't get along, but now he had to use him as a shield to dispel An Chui's suspicions. It was really ridiculous. He knows that Fang Ji came to you? An Chui frowned slightly. He hadn't expected Hua Yuan to be involved. Lu Zheng nodded. Yes. When Hua Yuan went to the manor, Fang Ji was still there, but he didn't say anything. Hua Yuan was a good shield. Indeed, most of An Chui's suspicions were dispelled. His original thoughts began to waver. An Chui's expression softened, but Lu Zheng couldn't help but close his eyes. He didn't want to see An Chui's reaction. He didn't want An Chui to see his disappointment. An Chui muttered to himself, "Why didn't he tell me? Perhaps he thinks that Fang Ji is harmless, or perhaps he thinks that my loyalty to you is unquestionable, or perhaps he thinks that this is something that can be used against me in the future." As Lu Zheng spoke, the mockery on his face intensified. Which one does my lord think it is? Lu Zheng's question was rather blunt, and he even seemed to be reprimanding An Chui to his face. Hearing this, An Chui was secretly dissatisfied. "Xiaoyin, are you blaming me?" An Chui asked despite knowing the answer. Hearing this, Lu Zheng sneered inwardly. Complain. He, Lu Zheng, had suffered so many grievances, but in An Chui's eyes they were merely complaints. He now regretted his blindness back then. Even Jiang Pingji, that unreliable and fickle woman, was more reliable than An Chui. An Chui was truly a fighter among scumbags. He took it for granted that he would be able to enjoy the blessings of having two wives. With his left arm around Hua Yuan and his right arm around Lu Zheng, the two strategists would hold hands and become good brothers. For his great cause, they would do their utmost until the day they die. All personal conflicts must be put aside, and he could not neglect the public for personal reasons. He said, "From what you said just now, you seem to have a deep misunderstanding of Hua Qing. Both you and he are upright people who uphold justice. Why would he use underhanded tricks to frame a colleague? I heard that the two of you were at odds in private, but I didn't expect you to be like water and fire. Xiaoyin, both you and he are my right-hand men. You are like my lips and teeth. Although there are conflicts between our lips and teeth, We depend on each other and support each other. Lu Zheng was speechless. Could Chui stop talking when he didn't know how to speak? He was about to vomit from Chui's analogy. Damn it, Hua Yuan and I are like lips and teeth. Forget it, forget it. With Chui, the peerless scumbag, serving as a foil, Jiang Pingji, the scumbag, could even claim to be his favorite, the white moonlight. Lu Zheng said, "My lord, do you really not know about the conflict between me and Hua Yuan?" Chui furrowed his brows and said, "I've heard about it occasionally, but I don't think Xiaoyin is the kind of person who would delay public affairs because of a personal grudge." Lu Zheng's previous personal image was too bright and lofty. Not only Chui, but everyone else took it for granted that Lu Zheng would sacrifice his personal grudge for public affairs. They had completely forgotten that Lu Zheng was human, not a saint. He also had emotions and desires. He couldn't be selfless. After Lu Zheng heard this, he felt especially tired. Even though Chui had met with misfortune in his middle age, the habits he had developed in his early years had long been deeply ingrained in his bones. After his recovery, he had forgotten what it felt like to be a human being in fear and trepidation. He had regained the confidence of a high and mighty aristocratic family. He had completely forgotten what scruples were, and he wouldn't empathize with Lu Zheng's difficulties. Chui's question just now was very inappropriate. He was blatantly accusing Lu Zheng of abandoning public affairs for personal reasons, and purposely making life difficult for Hua Yuan. Lu Zheng concealed the disappointment in his heart. He bowed and cupped his hands. His tone was calm as he said, "Lu Shi used such a despicable method to frame me and incite discord in my lord's trust in me. But I can't produce strong evidence to prove my innocence. This is my fault. Regarding Feng Zhi's matter, it was indeed my lack of consideration. In order to avoid arousing suspicion, I'm willing to ground myself and hand over my military power. I'll decide what to do after the truth comes to light and I'm proven innocent." Chui was dumbfounded when he heard this. He did want to denounce Lu Zheng for his crimes, but after saying it out loud, the balance in his heart leaned towards Lu Zheng. He regretted being overly suspicious. However, Lu Zheng had made things very clear and didn't give him a way out. No matter what Chui thought, Lu Zheng couldn't be bothered to figure it out. He ground himself and didn't care about anything else. On the other side, Jiang Pingji was still persistently writing letters to her old classmate. She would write a letter when there was a war, when there was no war, when she was in a good mood, when she was in a bad mood. Wuxia wiped off his cold sweat, and watched as his lord stretched her legs on the brink of having her legs broken by Lu Zheng. Isn't my lord afraid that doing this will dispel Chui's suspicions? Chui was Wuxia's former lord. He knew him very well. Once he made up his mind, his lofty heroism was very bewitching. Back then, Wuxia was willing to leave his mountain and follow Chui not only because he was moved by his sincerity, but also because of his trust in him. In his lord's words, Chui was the head of multi-level marketing. He was very good at selling promotions. If Chui let down his guard and trusted Lu Zheng again, Lu Zheng might have a change of heart. After all, he was the man he had chosen. He had to assist him even if he had to kneel down to make the impossible possible. Even if the other party was a pile of sh*t, there would always be strategists who wanted to carve him into a flower. Unfortunately, Lu Zheng was such a person. Chapter 1671. Other than Chui, no one knew what had happened between him and Lu Zheng. They only knew that Lu Zheng had been sick since that day, and Kong Xintong was in charge of serving tea. Outsiders thought it was just an excuse, and Chui also thought that Lu Zheng was pretending to be sick. Who knew that Lu Zheng was really sick? Very seriously. Kong Xintong watched as Lu Zheng lost weight at a visible speed. She was so anxious that she cried. But there was nothing she could do. Godfather, the doctor said that this is a mental illness. Ordinary medicine can't cure it. The depression in his heart was difficult to dispel. To put it bluntly, Lu Zheng had fallen ill from worry. Lu Zheng lay motionless on the bed. It wasn't that he didn't want to, but his body was weak and his mind was muddled. As his illness worsened, he often couldn't remember things. He didn't even remember what he had said a second ago. In the eyes of outsiders, his sickly appearance was quite strong. His eyes were sunken, his lips were chapped, and his bright eyes were like the eyes of a dead fish. There was no trace of his former elegance, and Cui came to visit twice. Each time, he only stayed for a short while before leaving with a sigh. A few days ago, he even asked about Lu Zheng's illness. When he heard the doctor say that it was caused by a mental illness, and Cui realized something and stopped asking. Why should he continue asking? And Cui was a proud person. He knew that Lu Zheng's illness was caused by his dissatisfaction with him, so why would he seek trouble? Lu Zheng drank medicine for a few days, and his illness was under control. He stayed awake longer and longer, but his spirit was still weak. Kang Xintong took care of him seriously, and didn't ask him to do anything big or small. This filial piety was rare. Lu Zheng said, I was just angry and couldn't get over it. When I get over it, my illness will naturally get better. Kang Xintong asked. Outsiders say that Godfather is wise and resourceful. What else in this world can make you feel bad? Lu Zheng said, How can I take the flattery of outsiders seriously? There are many things that I can't get over. For example? Lu Zheng raised his hand to push up the band that had slid down from his forehead. He sighed and said, For example, you spent a lot of money to buy a raw stone and treated it like a treasure. You carried it with you every day and spent years carving and polishing it. On the day you succeeded, you thought it would be the most dazzling jewel in the world, but someone told you that there were as many latrines as you wanted. Kang Xintong shivered. She felt that her foster father was scolding her. Lu Zheng said faintly, No matter who it is, they will most likely take things too hard when they encounter such a thing. Kang Xintong wanted to say something but hesitated. She was hesitating between selling it or not. Kang Xintong repeated in a murmur. The general who was killed by An Cui out of anger was innocent. There was a problem with the rations before they were plundered. The person in charge of the rations was Hua Yuan. Looking at the overall situation, he was the only one who had the motive and ability to tamper with the rations. At this critical moment, An Cui's only adopted son died suddenly. It's hard not to suspect a conspiracy. An Cui refuses to listen to advice. He will die without a complete corpse. At this point, Lu Zheng did not address An Cui as Lord in front of his adopted daughter. Instead, he called him by his name. Kang Xintong said, Hua Yuan? What's in it for him to do this? Lu Zheng said, How would I know what a lunatic is thinking? Then aren't we in great danger? Kang Xintong did not like An Cui, but if An Cui was toppled, the father-daughter duo would be in a difficult situation. Lu Zheng snorted. Lu she owes me a debt. Does she dare to burn the bridge after crossing it? A debt? Lu Zheng said. You'll know when the time comes. Kang Xintong did not ask further after hearing this. The root of Lu Zheng's illness was in his heart. If he refused to get over it, it would be difficult for ordinary medicine to work. Because An Cui had courted death, Lu Zheng had given up. The latter watched coldly as he recuperated from his illness. As the battle escalated, An Cui retreated step by step. The rations predicament became more and more severe. Hua Yuan, who was at the rear, was slow. In addition, Jiang Pingji had sent people to interfere with the rations several times. An Cui was attacked from all sides. Why is it so noisy outside? Lu Zheng closed the bamboo scroll and looked up to ask. Kang Xintong said, The rations have arrived. They've solved our urgent problem. Lu Zheng frowned. His eyes revealed his deep thoughts. Godfather, we're having meat porridge for lunch today. Kong Xintong came in with 2 bowls of fragrant meat porridge. She picked up some pickled vegetables as a side dish. The meat tastes a little sour. Lu Zheng picked up the meat porridge and took a bite. He seemed to have bitten into something. His expression changed drastically and he vomited. Chapter 1672. Kong Xintong was so frightened by this turn of events that she hurriedly put down the wooden bowl in her hands. With a clatter, some of the broth in the bowl spilled out as she moved, splashing onto the table. She couldn't care less about this and hurriedly went forward to support Lu Zheng, who was pretending to vomit. Kong Xintong was already frightened out of her wits by this turn of events. She thought Lu Zheng had been poisoned. Godfather. Godfather. Has someone poisoned the porridge? Kong Xintong thought of the broken relationship between her godfather and her lord, and Chui, and the irreconcilable conflict. Her first reaction was to suspect Chui of poisoning people. Anger burned in her heart. Lu Zheng was still bending over and vomiting. Tears flowed out of the corners of his eyes. The corners of his eyes were dyed red, making him look more fragile. Kong Xintong could only pat his back to soothe his breathing. When he was about to vomit bile, Kong Xintong got up and brought him some water to rinse his mouth. Lu Zheng vomited heavily. His expression turned from green to bloodless white. It's not poison. Lu Zheng suppressed the nausea that rose up in his throat from time to time, and took the water Kong Xintong handed him to rinse his mouth. Only then did he feel better. Kong Xintong's eyes were filled with surprise and fear. She asked timidly, "It's not poison. Could it be that the meat has rotted?" Lu Zheng pursed his lips and didn't speak. But from his expression and gaze, this bowl of porridge wasn't as childish as rotting. Could it be? Kong Xintong had been raised by Lu Zheng's side for a few months. Her horizons and knowledge had improved by leaps and bounds. Lu Zheng's various reactions gave Kong Xintong a very bad feeling. She looked down at the things Lu Zheng had vomited and scanned them with her eyes. Kong Xintong suddenly saw something. Her gaze almost froze. Before she could scream, Lu Zheng's warm and broad palm covered her eyes. "Stop looking. Have someone come in and tidy up the things." Lu Zheng's voice was slightly hoarse, as if he was suppressing something. Kong Xintong felt more at ease when she heard him. She took a few deep breaths and suppressed the sour taste that seemed to be rising up in her throat. She ran out without looking back. Zheng distinctly heard the sound of Kong Xintong vomiting outside the tent, and a sense of disappointment and mockery surfaced in his heart. He picked up a pair of chopsticks and fiddled with the vomit. A flat armor-like object rolled out with a small piece of bone attached to it. This was the foreign object that Lu Zheng had just bitten. If he was not mistaken, this was clearly someone's little finger bone, and the fingernail was still on it. Lu Zheng stared at it for a long time. Although he did not vomit, his face turned pale. Lu Zheng was lost in thought as he sat on the bed. No one knew what he was thinking. He did not even hear the sound of Kong Xintong lifting the curtain and coming in. When he came back to his senses, he hurriedly hid the item. Unfortunately, he was a step too slow, and Kong Xintong still saw it. "Godfather, the meat porridge that I mistakenly ate just now was actually mixed with human flesh, right?" Kong Xintong asked with a trembling voice. Her watery eyes were filled with panic and fear. There are many dead in the war between the two armies, and Chui is short of rations, and the supply lines are often obstructed. They are already at the point of running out of ammunition and rations. Hua Yuan is also secretly obstructing them from the rear. The people who are collecting rations mix human flesh into the porridge and made it into minced meat. It doesn't seem unexpected. "Xintong, did you see it?" Seeing that she had seen it, Lu Zheng did not continue to hide it. Instead, he straightened his body and a bitter smile appeared on his pale face. He pointed at the half-cooked little finger and said with a complicated expression, "In troubled times, we are at the chopping block, and those who are separated are meat on the chopping block. Be it in Shui or Lu Shi, in the end, they are just people who are pushed by the world to struggle. The most pitiful are these people who can't even be buried in peace after their deaths. They have to be made into dried meat for the three armies to eat. We have to get rid of it." Kang Xintong's body trembled in fear. She thought that the scene she had experienced was the most tragic. That was until Lu Zheng brought her to a dark alley for a stroll, which refreshed her view of the world. She thought that was the cruelest side of troubled times. Only now did she realize that this not-so-bloody scene in front of her gave her an impact that the former couldn't compare to. "Xintong, find someone to inquire about the source of this batch of rations. I want to see when this farce will end." Seeing that Kang Xintong was slowly calming down, Lu Zheng's expression softened a little. He instructed, "Remember, you must inquire carefully and don't alarm others." Kang Xintong nodded heavily. She went forward to clean up the 2 bowls of porridge and the vomit on the ground. Although the things were cleaned up, the memory that was deeply engraved in her mind was not so easy to forget. The more Kang Xintong didn't want to think about it, the more the little finger and the half-hanging nail swayed in front of her. It made her face pale and her spirit weak. After spending a lot of effort to inquire about the detailed information, Kang Xintong didn't delay and immediately informed Lu Zheng. She repeated clearly, "Godfather, I've inquired about the news. According to the rumor, Hua Yuan sent someone to inform us that the new rations will arrive in 3 days, but the army's rations are almost depleted." And Shui had no choice but to send people to the nearby towns to plunder the surplus rations of the commoners. Lu Zheng sat on the bed with his clothes draped over his shoulders. He couldn't help but sneer. "Ridiculous. Let's not talk about how many commoners there are in the nearby towns. Even if there were many commoners, the war last year affected the crops, and Lu Shi destroyed the spring plowing this year. The food stored in the commoners' homes isn't enough for them to last an entire year, much less the hundreds of thousands of soldiers under An Chui's command." Kang Xintong said, "In the end, we had to use extraordinary means to gather a batch of rations. If it's not enough, we have to make up for it with human breasts." Kang Xintong frowned when she said the word, human breasts. She looked like she wanted to vomit. Compared to Kang Xintong's reaction, Lu Zheng was much calmer. It wasn't that he was more accepting than Kang Xintong, nor was it that he was cold-hearted. It was just that he had seen more things. Human breasts were not rare in history books. There were even records of people trading their children for food and cannibalism. More than 10 years ago, the 4 factions of Nanman had wreaked havoc on the commoners of Nansheng. Wherever they passed, not even a blade of grass would grow. Wherever they went to war, they would burn, kill, and pillage. Similarly, they would eat people wherever they went. The allied army of Nansheng had conquered Nanman and plundered countless spoils of war. At that time, the relationship between Lu Zheng and An Chui hadn't completely fallen apart. At most, there was some conflict. The latter knew that Lu Zheng liked books, so he organized all the books and spoils of war he plundered and threw them all to Lu Zheng. Later, Lu Zheng stayed at home and organized the books out of boredom. After sorting them into different categories, he unintentionally discovered a gourmet guide written by a scholar of a different tribe in Nanman. He named it Cannibal Rhapsody. It wasn't very literary, but every word he wrote made the reader's hair stand on end. Chapter 1673. A baby's flesh was brittle and could not be boiled for too long. Baby girls were the best. Children's flesh was tender and cooked to a certain extent. Ginger garlic rice wine removed the fishy smell. Boys were the best. Adults' flesh was sour but chewy. Men's lean flesh was especially outstanding. Women had more white flesh and were slightly greasy. They were suitable for human oil. The flesh of old men was unbearably stinky and sour. It was tasteless. Only human bones were boiled into soup with spices. The soup was rich and fragrant. Apart from these, the author had also tried unborn fetuses in women's wombs. There were fetuses every month. The entire Cannibal Rhapsody had less than 500 words, but each word was filled with the greatest malice and evil in the world. After reading the Cannibal Rhapsody, Lu Zheng's desire for peace grew stronger. He had staked everything on Shui, hoping that such a tragedy would not happen again. In the end, Shui disappointed him again and again. Shui and Nduoshi could not bear Lu Zheng's ambition. Kong Xintong sobbed. Human breasts. How could they make them? Lu Zheng said calmly. That depends on the situation. Kong Xintong was shocked by the information revealed in Lu Zheng's words. Her red eyes widened. She called out hesitantly, her voice trembling, "Foster father." If Shui was a wise ruler, there would naturally be people who would stand up and take the blame for the matter of mixing human breast milk as army rations. Lu Zheng sighed. We are not the other tribes. They are unscrupulous and cannibalism is a common occurrence. But we are different. There are some things the other tribes can do and we can't. Using humans as food to fill one's stomach, even if it's an expedient measure, is an act that goes against human ethics. It's extremely cruel. Not only will it be criticized by the world, but it will also be reviled by future generations. Even so, it depends on whether it's worth it. Kong Xintong's voice was as soft as a mosquito's. Foster father, you mean, Lu Zheng said. If we're really at the end of the line, Shui is worthy of being reviled for generations. Human breasts are also worth it. He didn't care about using human breasts as army rations, but that Shui wasn't worthy of others taking the blame for him. This was Lu Zheng's worldview. It wasn't just him. Many strategists were the same. After Kong Xintong heard this, her body slightly trembled. It was unknown what kind of battle was going on in her heart. If you think it's cruel, wait until these matters are settled, and you can stay in the inner courtyard until you are of age. I will find a good marriage for you. Lu Zheng's expression was calm as he said. Hua Yuan said that the provisions will arrive in 3 days, but this person's words cannot be trusted. He is not loyal to Shui and even has the ambition to murder and replace him. I will never be a bird in the inner chamber. Lu Zheng's lips curled up into a faint smile. Good. Because of the human breast, Kong Xintong and Lu Zheng did not have the appetite to eat that day. They could not stop the soldiers from eating this batch of provisions. They could only guarantee that they would not eat it. Tomorrow, I will find an excuse to take you out of the military camp. Shui was destined to kneel, either in the hands of Jiang Pengji or Hua Yuan. Lu Zheng did not want to be buried with him. Besides, the provisions of the military camp could not last for 2 or 3 days. After the ammunition and provisions were exhausted, Shui might not be able to control the situation. Lu Zheng cherished his life. He did not want to die before he saw the world at peace. Kong Xintong nodded. She raised her hand and soaked the hard flatbread in the hot soup. Otherwise, she could not bite it at all. Lu Zheng ate 2 bites and put it down. He let Kong Xintong eat the rest. Just as Lu Zheng had expected, the provisions promised by Hua Yuan did not arrive. Everyone raised their heads in anticipation, but they did not see the grain team. The people sent to receive the grain team fell into the enemy's ambush. The enemy gave them a head-on blow. They were beaten until they did not know which way was north. When Shui received the news, he was so angry that he fainted. The main culprit, Li Yun, led the soldiers in his tent back to the camp happily. He thought that this was an ordinary meritorious service. He did not expect that his lord would give him a great merit. The enemy's scale was not large, and their combat power was not strong. Li Yin was practically suppressing them without any pressure. He did not expect that he would make a great contribution. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.